Chapter 1938. In the Azura Sword Field, the 3-meter-tall, iron tower-like brawny man appeared in front of Nyetian, releasing a roaring aura around him, making him look like a wild beast, violent and violent. "Who the hell are you?" Nyetian looked at the towering giant in front of him with no fear in his eyes. He just asked with a faint smile, "Brat, I'm Tai Tu of the 10,000 Evil Sect." Tai Tu roared out furiously. His voice was like thunder as his presence surged. He was extremely ferocious. "Another person from the 10,000 Evil Sect." Nyetian's eyes narrowed slightly. He sneered, "You people from the 10,000 Evil Sect sure are interesting. You're sending yourselves to your deaths one after another. Brat, you're so arrogant." Tai Tu roared out furiously. His thunderous voice boomed out, and he said, "Do you know who that poison bat you just killed is? He's my underling." Before Nyetian could speak, Tai Tu roared out, "That brat poison bat was too weak. He was killed by you. As his elder brother, I must avenge him today." Nyetian was stunned. He had never thought that Tai Tu and Poison Bat would know each other. It seemed like the two of them were quite close. However, Nyetian did not see any sorrow on Tai Tu's face at all. There was only violent killing intent. Tai Tu called himself Poison Bat's elder brother, but his strength was the same as Poison Bat's. They were both peak overgods and had reached the realm of selflessness. Nyetian was rather curious about what Tai Tu's sword looked like with his size. At this moment, Tai Tu's appearance caused a disturbance in the spectator stands. They all began discussing. "Another person from the 10,000 Evil Sect. He's built like a bear, but he's not much stronger than Poison Bat. He'll probably be killed instantly by that silver-haired brat again. Yeah, Tai Tu seems very powerful, but he's actually just an empty shell. He looks impressive, but he's useless. The swordsmen of the 10,000 Evil Sect are all extremely exquisite, but they're not that strong. For Poison Bat and Tai Tu to run into this silver-haired brat, they really have 8 lifetimes of bad luck." The crowd continued to discuss among themselves. This time, they were all on Nyetian's side, believing that Nyetian could kill Tai Tu with a single strike. Nyetian couldn't help but shake his head when he heard what everyone said. To be honest, he did not have the confidence to kill Tai Tu in one strike. Although Tai Tu and Poison Bat's strength was the same, Nyetian could feel that Tai Tu's martial body was several levels higher than Poison Bat's. The Poison Bat was good at ambushing and assassinating. It was very fast, but its martial body was not strong. Therefore, as long as Nyetian locked on a Poison Bat, he would be able to kill him instantly. Tai Tu, on the other hand, was different. It was obvious that he was the kind of guy who liked to fight head-on. His martial body was much stronger than other warriors of the same level. If Nyetian wanted to instantly kill Tai Tu, he would have to use the 3 forbidden techniques. However, he had no intention of using the forbidden techniques now, because he knew that the real experts had yet to come. The 3 forbidden techniques were reserved for those guys. Facing Tai Tu, Nyetian was still prepared to use his current strength to kill him. He would not use the 3 forbidden techniques. "Little brat, are you not going to make a move because you want me to make the first move?" Tai Tu stared at Nyetian with his wolf-like eyes and said with a sinister expression, "It's not wise to let me make the first move." Nyetian's lips curled into a cold smile. When the crowd saw this, they couldn't help but think of the second swordsman who was instantly killed by Nyetian. The second swordsman had let Nyetian make the first move. In the end, he didn't even have the chance to make the first move before he died. Now that Tai Tu had let Nyetian make the first move, it was a provocation. Courting death. Sensing the disdain in Nyetian's eyes, Tai Tu couldn't help but let out a furious roar. Then he stretched out one of his huge arms, and a huge, pitch-black sword appeared in his hand. Sword intent gushed out of the sword as it slashed towards Nyetian. Boom! The sword intent was majestic like the mountains and the seas. When the sword chi burst forth, it was extremely swift and fierce. Nyetian was slightly taken aback, after which a pair of astral soul wings appeared on his back. Lightly stepping on the ground, he agilely dodged Tai Tu's attack. Rumble! Tai Tu's sword missed. The huge pitch-black sword shadow slashed the ground, causing the entire Azura sword field to tremble. A terrifying crater appeared on the ground. The Azura sword field was reinforced by a sword formation. Tai-Tu's sword strike was able to split the ground. This was enough to show how strong his strength was. Dark Star Ghost Kill. At the same time, Nietion's body was in midair. The corners of his mouth twitched as he stabbed out with his sword. A sword intent that was as swift as the wind and as fast as lightning abruptly shot out. However, this sword intent was hidden in the air, invisible and formless. Puff! Before Tai-Tu could react, he felt his shoulders sink. A bloody hole appeared and blood spurted out. Dark Star Ghost Kill was an assassination technique of the Starry Sky ancient martial art. Nietion hadn't used it for a long time. Now that he used it, it was quite effective. This guy's martial body is really strong. He's actually fine after taking the power of the Dark Star Ghost Kill head-on. Nietion's sword fell as he looked at Tai-Tu with a heavy gaze. The strength of Tai-Tu's martial body was even more terrifying than he had imagined. Little bastard, how dare you sneak attack your uncle Tai-Tu? Tai-Tu's shoulder was injured, but he didn't care about it all. With a roar, he fiercely stomped on the ground and soared into the sky. His sword swept out wildly towards Nietion. Nietion's figure was incomparably agile. The wings on his back flapped, and he easily dodged Tai-Tu's attack. Then he stabbed out with his sword again. Another wound appeared on Tai-Tu's body. Damn it! Tai-Tu roared furiously like a berserk beast. His bell-like eyes turned red and bloodshot as he waved the black heavy sword in his hand nonstop. Streaks of terrifying sword shadows whistled through the air, causing the entire Azura sword field to shake slightly. However, Nietion's figure was very strange. It was erratic as he shuttled through the endless sword shadows with ease. The crowd was dazzled. Before they could react, they saw that Tai-Tu had already become a bloody man. His whole body was dripping with blood as he stood in the air. Damn bastard, do you only know how to F Asterisk King dodge? Tai-Tu was completely infuriated by Nietion. He was about to go crazy. Nietion's figure froze as he coldly stared at Tai-Tu's day. He chuckled and said, "All right, this battle is over." When Tai-Tu heard the word over from Nietion, he couldn't help but be stunned. Before he could react, he saw Nietion's figure flying straight at him like an arrow leaving the bow. Before Tai-Tu could react, he suddenly felt a huge impact on his divine sense. He let out a strange cry as he lost control of his mind. His eyes became dull in an instant. One sword kill. Nietion's figure was like lightning as he slashed out with his sword. A stream of sword shadows appeared and fell towards Tai-Tu like a pouring waterfall. Puff! In the next moment, the sound of flesh tearing rang out. In a flash of blood, Tai-Tu's huge body was split in half from the middle. This incomparably bloody scene drew an end to the battle. Chapter 1939. The Azura sword field was in chaos. Everyone looked at Nietion in horror, their eyes trembling. Not only was Nietion terrifyingly strong, but his attacks were also ruthless and decisive, not giving his opponents any chance to escape. Such a person was indeed terrifying. In a VIP lounge, Gong Sunsheng's fat body trembled even more visibly. He was very surprised. That kid from the Nie family is a peerless genius in both strength and talent, but his battle talent is also so terrifying. The guy called Tai-Tu has a very strong martial body. If they were to fight head-on, the kid from the Nie family might not be his match. But this kid used tactics. First, he angered Tai-Tu. Then when the latter was at his most furious, he used a spiritual attack and killed him in the end. All of this was done in one go. He killed a powerful opponent with the least loss of power. Kid from the Nie family, you are really not simple. Over and over again, Gong Sunsheng was shocked by Nietion. He had never expected that Nietion could use psychic attacks, not to mention that he had executed them perfectly and killed Tai-Tu with a single strike at the most critical moment. Gong Sunsheng had to admit that Nietion had indeed used a psychic attack to kill Tai-Tu's day. Tai-Tu had been in a delirious state before he had died. If Nietion fought head-on without activating the three forbidden skills, he might not be a match for Tai Tuesday. After all, Tai Tu's strength was a realm higher than his, and his martial body was extremely strong. Spiritual attack. Nietion, Nietion, how many more trump cards do you have? Xian Zongfeng's face was filled with horror, and he roared in his heart. He was even a little worried that Nietion still had a very powerful trump card that he had not used. Thinking of this, Xian Zongfeng's eyes flickered. He then looked at the VIP room opposite him and said in his heart, Lianru, you are one of the 13 reverse scale thorns. Killing Nietion shouldn't be a problem. I hope you won't let me down. Lianru, the reverse scale killer, was secretly arranged by Xian Zongfeng. This person was the true obstacle in Nietion's path to the Azure Sword Field. At this moment, Gue Wu Kuangsha's complexion had turned much better, as he knew that Nietion had yet to use his three great forbidden techniques. Once he did so, the latter's combat prowess would increase by several levels. It looked like Nietion was already very confident in passing the sword grounds. Gue Wu Kuangsha did not expect that Nietion would actually have such a rapid increase in his strength in just a few days, causing him to be shocked. Nietion, no wonder you're so confident. It turns out that your strength is already so terrifying. Gue Wu Kuangsha thought to himself, the corners of his mouth involuntarily curling up. At the same time, in another VIP room, the Forbidden Scale assassin Lu Yinger's expression was ugly. Her delicate features were scrunched together. She looked at Lianru and said, Lianru, did you see that? Nietion's strength is much more terrifying than you can imagine. This mission is not that simple. Lianru's expression changed slightly. It was obvious that he was quite surprised, but he immediately sneered and said, I admit that this kid called Nietion is indeed very strange. Not only is he first-rate in martial arts, but his combat prowess is also very terrifying. But I still have to say that his strength is too weak. The people he killed were all small fries with no combat prowess at all. If he meets me, I guarantee that I will kill him with a single sword strike. Lianru's eyes were filled with killing intent. He was very calm and also very disdainful. Until now, he still did not change the way he thought. He still regarded Nietion as an ant that could be killed at any time. Lu Yinger's beautiful eyes flickered. She sighed softly and did not speak anymore. Who's next? On the Azure Sword Field, Nietion spoke again. His eyes were extremely cold. He had said the same words several times, but each time it was more and more powerful. After 4 consecutive victories, Nietion's strength had been proven. As soon as his voice fell, the Azure Sword Field fell into a dead silence. No one responded for a long time. What's wrong? You swordsmen who usually think highly of yourselves, are you scared by a high god? At this moment, the black-clothed referee's voice sounded. It was full of mockery. It was obvious that he was provoking the others. All right, let me do it. As expected, someone could not bear any longer. With a roar, he flew over and appeared directly in front of Nietion. It was a black-clothed swordsman. His body was full of murderous intent. His eyes were extremely cold. One look, and anyone could tell that he was a cruel and bloodthirsty person. A superior god expert. Nietion looked at this person and could not help but tremble. Finally, he had met an opponent with strength that was passable. That guy's a superior god expert. The appearance of the black-clothed swordsman caused the crowd to become restless. Everyone's eyes were filled with anticipation. A superior god martial artist against a superior god martial artist. The disparity in strength between the two was so great that it made people feel very nervous. By now, everyone knew that Nietion was not an ordinary superior god martial artist. His strength had exceeded everyone's understanding of martial arts. They could not treat him as a normal person. Kill! The black-clothed swordsman did not say a word. With a low roar, he moved and attacked Nietion. Nietion frowned slightly. The astral soul wings appeared on his back. He stepped forward and stabbed out with his sword. At the same time, the sword nascent soul whizzed out. Rumble! In midair, the two sword shadows collided with each other. A violent sword wave spread out in all directions. Bang! Immediately after, a muffled sound rang out. Nietion's figure was forced back again and again. A trace of blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. Nietion was injured. The black-clothed swordsman was very strong. He had the strength of an early-stage, superior god. Coupled with the realm of the sword, he was extremely terrifying. Without using the 3 forbidden skills, Nietion was no match for this person. The black-clothed swordsman was faster than Poison Bat and stronger than Tai Tuesday. He was a very difficult opponent to deal with. Damn, that kid is done for. The crowd could not help but cry out when they saw that Nietion was injured. Their eyes were filled with shock. Nietion steadied himself and stood in midair. He wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and smiled bitterly. A superior god martial artist is indeed far superior to an over-god martial artist. A superior god martial artist was a martial artist who had comprehended a superior Tao intent. Every attack of theirs contained the power of Tao intent. The power of Tao intent was a very mysterious power. It could increase the power of a martial artist's attack by several times. Oh, the black-clothed swordsman could not help but be stunned when he saw that Nietion was still alive. His face sank, and he roared again, "Die!" With that, the black-clothed swordsman struck out with his sword. A huge sword shadow appeared, carrying with it a tremendous amount of power as it flew toward Nietion. At that moment, everyone's hearts clenched. They could almost see the scene of Nietion being killed. Nietion stood in the air. His body trembled slightly, and strange runes of forbidden skills surged out and covered him. Chapter 1940. What a powerful sword move. In the Azura sword field, everyone felt a powerful pressure from sword. Their eyes couldn't help but tremble as they cried out. Boom! At the same time, the mighty blurs of the sword fell from the sky above the Azura sword field. The surroundings seemed to collapse as the space trembled. The swordsman in black was unable to react at all. He was directly swallowed by the blurs of the sword. Not even his corpse remained. The sudden scene caused the entire Azura sword field to fall into a deathly silence. Everyone's eyes trembled. They could not believe what they had just seen. Nietion, who was originally at an absolute disadvantage, had suddenly exploded in strength, killing the swordsman in black in a single stroke. This scene was too strange, and it was impossible for anyone to believe it. How did he become a peak over god? After a moment of silence, someone finally returned to their senses. They cried out in shock as if they had seen a ghost. His strength has increased by a major realm. How is that possible? The others cried out. They were completely stunned. They had not seen wrongly. Nietion's strength had indeed increased by a major realm, going from peak high god to peak over god. My battle prowess has actually become so powerful after my comprehension of the laws of the sword increased. Nietion's eyes narrowed slightly, and he could not help but smile. He had never thought that the attack earlier would be so powerful, directly killing the swordsman in black. If he had known that the attack would be so powerful, Nietion would not have used the 3 forbidden techniques. Impossible. In the VIP lounge, Gongsun Sheng sprang to his feet and let out a strange cry, a look of shock on his face. It was fortunate that the VIP room had a soundproof sword formation where other people would definitely be frightened if they heard Gongsun Shengji's cry. The mighty master of the divine sword, the greatest swordsman of the 9 regions, had actually been shocked to such an extent. It was not something fun at all. Xian Zongfeng was also shocked. His eyes trembled. Clearly, he had not expected Nietion to be so powerful. The strength that Nietion had displayed before was already unbelievable, but the battle prowess he displayed right now had completely exceeded everyone's imagination. On the other hand, Guiwu Guangsha and the others were already aware of Nietion's trump card. Therefore, they weren't too surprised. In another VIP room, the 2 forbidden scale assassins, Lu Yinger and Lian Ru, were also dumbfounded. They were speechless for a long time. If the strength that Nietion had displayed just now had not amazed Lian Ru, then his current strength was enough to shock and even make her fearful. Lian Ru didn't care about Nietion. who had the power of a peak high god. However, the peak over god Nyetian made him feel pressured. Old 5. At that moment, a few howls suddenly rang out on the Azura sword field, and then 3 figures appeared. All of them were filled with grief and anger. Their furious eyes locked onto Nyetian, and they wanted to skin him alive. Nyetian narrowed his eyes and looked at the 3 swordsmen. Their strength was not any weaker than the black-robed swordsmen from before. They should be the brothers of the black-robed swordsmen. Just as Nyetian raised his head, one of the swordsmen let out a strange cry and then roared, "Second brother, this brat killed 5th brother. Let's attack together and avenge 5th brother. Avenge 5th brother." The other swordsman also let out a strange cry. Then he moved and directly stabbed his sword towards Nyetian. As soon as this swordsman moved, the other 2 also moved. The 3 of them actually launched attacks at the same time. Like 3 flood dragons, 3 sword shadows surged down from the sky and merged into one as they slashed towards Nyetian. Everything happened in the blink of an eye. The crowd could not help but gasp when they realized what was going on. Their gazes became strange and shocked. The 3 of them attacked Nyetian at the same time. This was something that had never happened in the Azura sword field before. The Azura sword field had always been a one-on-one battle. How could there be 3 people attacking at the same time? However, the black-robe referee did not stop them. Instead, he gloomily looked at Nyetian, his eyes extremely vicious. The black-robe referee was a late-stage paramount god. If he wanted to stop them, the 3 swordsmen would not have a chance to do anything. However, he clearly wanted to kill Nyetian, so he would not save him. Even if the 3 swordsmen broke the Azura sword field's rules, he did not care. Nyetian glanced at the black-robed referee and saw the latter's vicious eyes. He immediately understood that the latter must have been arranged by Xian Zongfeng. Xian Zongfeng was really cautious. In order to kill Nyetian, he even arranged for the Azura sword field's referee to be someone he had arranged. If that's the case, then let them come at me together. Nyetian's eyes trembled. It was not fear that was revealed, but incomparably fierce battle intent. He wanted to see just what level his battle prowess had reached, and these 3 swordsmen working together was exactly what he wanted. Sword Dragon devours the world. Feeling the powerful impact coming from above, Nyetian did not dare to be careless. With a low roar, a violent blood chi surged from his body. The sword sealing restriction formation was activated, and the extremely terrifying sword intent became even more violent under the stimulation of the sword formation. Roar! In the next moment, the endless sword intent of the formation gathered together, and a sword dragon that was close to 10,000 meters long appeared. It roared at the sky, and its angry roar resounded in the space. At this moment, everyone felt their hearts tremble, and their eyes were filled with shock. They simply couldn't believe the scene before their eyes. The sword dragon was too terrifying. The dragon Shi was monstrous, and the power of the dragon shook the world, as if it was going to destroy everything. Boom! The body of the sword dragon rolled up, and the terrifying dragon Shi and sword intent mixed together, and the space was about to be torn apart. Rumble! Immediately after, under the gazes of countless people, the sword dragon and the sword shadow in the sky collided. The space seemed to have stopped for a moment, and then an endless amount of violent energy exploded, wreaking havoc in the space, and ear-piercing sounds rang out unceasingly. Roar! In the next moment, the earth-shattering roar of the dragon rang out again, and the sword shadow in the sky couldn't withstand it any longer. It collapsed, and then 3 miserable shrieks rang out. The figures of the 3 swordsmen were drowned in the mighty dragon Chi, and not even their bones were left. At this moment, everyone's eyes were fixed on the sky, and they were so shocked that they couldn't react for a long time. If they hadn't seen it with their own eyes, no one would have believed that Nyetian could kill 3 early-stage paramount god swordsmen with a single sword strike. 3 early-stage paramount god swordsmen working together was enough to make a mid-stage paramount god feel threatened. Nyetian a mere high god, had killed 3 paramount gods with a single sword strike. The shock was indescribable. How is this possible? Up in the sky, the black-clothed referee was the first to react. He cried out in shock, and his cold eyes were filled with astonishment and shock. His expression was uglier than if he had eaten shit. Chapter 1941. Oh my God, what did I just see? That silver-haired swordsman killed 3 supreme gods with 1 strike. Oh my God, I'm not dreaming, am I? How is it possible for a high god to kill 3 paramount gods? 1 strike, 1 strike. He killed 3 paramount gods with a single sword move. He's a hellion, a freak, a freak. Countless screams echoed out as everyone looked at Nietian with shock and fear in their eyes. When Nietian first came to the stage, the crowd looked at him with disdain. But now, their attitudes took a 180-degree turn. The admiration and fear in their eyes was enough to explain everything. This was strength. It was Nietian's strength that changed everyone's attitude. If he didn't have strength, he would be a joke in the eyes of the crowd. In the VIP lounge, Gong Sun Sheng and the others were completely stunned. They couldn't believe the scene in front of them. Is he really a high god? Gong Sun Sheng asked in shock. His face was as ugly as it could be. Third Lady Gongsuin's pretty face was lifeless. She was completely shocked and had no reaction. Xian Zongfeng's face was gloomy. He shouted in his heart, "How is this possible? How is this possible? How can this kid be so strong?" Nietian's strength was way beyond their expectations. They were shocked, fearful, and even fearful. Xian Zongfeng began to worry whether the Ni Lin assassins he had arranged were a match for Nietian. At this time, Nietian had killed 8 swordsmen and won 8 battles in a row. There were still 2 more battles to go. This made Gong Sun Sheng a little restless. If Nietian won 10 battles in a row, he would have to bring forward the evil edge sword duel. Guiwu Guangsha and the others were stunned for a while before they reacted. Their faces were filled with ecstasy. It seemed that Nietian was within their reach through the Shura sword duel. In the Shura sword duel, Nietian suddenly raised his head and looked at the black-clothed referee. He said coldly, "I killed these 3 with 1 strike. That counts as 3 battles, right?" Of course. The black-clothed referee was stunned for a moment. Knowing that he was in the wrong, he could only nod his head. If he forcefully said that Nietian had just killed 3 people as a battle, that would be too shameless. He reckoned that everyone present would stand up and object. With a faint smile, Nietian asked, "How many battles have I won so far?" 8 matches. The black-clothed referee's eyelids twitched a few times as he replied with a sinister expression. He then looked at a VIP room. What a terrifying brat. Let me fight you. Right at this moment, a tyrannical roar rang out in the air as a tyrannical silhouette appeared, exuding a terrifying aura. Scram! However, before this figure could stand still, a low and murderous voice came from one of the VIP rooms, and then a sword intent whistled out, suddenly arriving and drawing a line of blood in the air. The tyrannical silhouette howled, but before he could finish his sentence, his body trembled and his bloody head flew into the air. His 2 eyeballs were still rolling around in shock. How could he have imagined that someone would suddenly attack him? Nietian was also stunned for a moment. He couldn't help but stare at the sky. "He's mine." Immediately after, a low and hoarse voice rang out, and a strange silhouette appeared in the air. Its face was covered with a ghost mask, and it stared coldly at Nietian. This silhouette was none other than the reverse scale killer, one of the 13 reverse scale thorns, Lien Ru. As soon as Lien Ru appeared, he immediately killed a swordsman who wanted to challenge Nietian. His ruthlessness was evident. Who is this? Everyone looked at Lien Ru, who had suddenly appeared, and their eyes couldn't help but tremble. They could feel an extremely sinister aura from the latter's body, causing their souls to tremble. Murderous aura. Looking at Lien Ru, Nietian's eyes suddenly trembled, and his expression changed. The moment Lien Ru appeared, Nietian felt that the space around him was filled with an evil, murderous aura, which made him feel slightly suffocated. To be able to control his murderous aura so perfectly, this person is definitely an assassin. Tian immediately reacted and said in his heart, "He's coming for me." Lien Ru killed the person who challenged Tian, and the murderous aura from his body was very strong. It was obvious that he was coming for Tian. Won the 13 reverse scale thorns, not bad indeed. At this moment, the black-clothed referee glanced at Lien Ru and smiled sinisterly. He said in his heart, "This is going to be a good show." The 13 reverse scale thorns refer to the 13 strongest assassins of the reverse scale. These 13 people specialized in killing people, and they had never failed. They were the most feared figures in the 9 major domains. In order to kill Tian, Xian Zongfeng had actually invited one of the 13 reverse scale thorns. It was obvious that he was determined to kill Tian. In the VIP lounge, Xian Zongfeng glared at Lien Ru and said viciously, "Don't let me down, Lien Ru." In another VIP lounge, Lu Yinger, who had come with Lien Ru, had an unsightly expression on her face. She had a bad premonition that something bad was about to happen. Lien Ru's body flickered as she looked down at Tian and said in a provocative tone, "Not bad, you brat. I can't believe you made it this far. Such intense, murderous aura. So you're an assassin." Tian smiled coolly, black magical symbols swirling around him, making him look very strange. He knew that the next battle was going to be the most important one. Lien Ru was an early paramount god, and his Tao of the Sword had reached the level of 1. His strength was the same as that of the few people Tian had killed earlier. The only difference was that Lien Ru's killing intent and sword intent were both far more powerful than those of the previous few. There was no doubt that Lien Ru was a terrifying opponent. "You're the first to be able to maintain such composure when facing my killing intent." Lien Ru spoke gloomily, and her voice was soft and carried an extremely ghastly and icy cold aura. "Is that so? Should I feel honored?" With a faint smile, Tian blurred into action and jumped high into the air. Without wasting any time, he said, "Let's begin." "You're very confident, brat," Lien Ru said coolly. "Too bad you're up against me." A short sword appeared in her hand, black and sinister, and pulsing with a frigid aura. At first, Lien Ru hadn't even taken Tian seriously. But now, he had to take him seriously and treat him as a true opponent. Dark Knight. Assassinate. In the next moment, Lien Ru's figure blurred into a streak of black light that shot directly towards Tian. He was an elementary swordsman who had reached the level of 1 swordsman in martial arts. Coupled with the power of his Tao intent, his sword seemed capable of ripping through the void. Tian's eyebrows furrowed slightly. Then he thrust out his sword, and a mighty sword shadow shot towards the black light in the sky. Chapter 1942. Chi Chi Chi. In the sky above the Shura sword field, an ear-piercing sound could be heard. In the space, the sword light shone brightly, shooting tens of thousands of meters away. It was the first time that Tian had fought with Lien Ru. He felt the pressure and retreated slightly to stabilize his body. Lien Ru's combat strength was indeed far beyond that of the previous swordsman. Whether it was the power of his sword will or his speed, they were very terrifying. He was not inferior to Tian at all. "Brat, I have to say that you have amazed me again." In the void, Lien Ru's figure was erratic, like a ball of black light. It was impossible to see his figure clearly. Only his cold voice could be heard in the air. When Lien Ru fought with Tian, he also felt the strength of the latter's sword will. He didn't expect that an ant that he would not even look at could fight with him head-on. Countless masters had died in Lien Ru's hands, but there were only a few who really made him feel pressured. Tian was one of them. "You talk too much nonsense." Tianling laughed, and then he stabbed out with his sword. The sword's shadow was like a dragon, splitting into 3 in the air and sweeping towards the black light in the air. He attacked very quickly, but Lien Ru was even faster. The black light jumped a few times in the air and easily avoided Tian's sword shadow. "This guy is so fast." Tian was surprised to see this. Among all the opponents that Tian had encountered, No one could match Lien Ru's speed except for Luo Xian, who had activated the Thousand Clouds barrier. However, Luo Xian's speed was achieved by using the Thousand Clouds barrier to slow down the flow of time, while Lien Ru's speed was pure speed. They were completely different. Brat, you are very fast, but unfortunately, in front of me, your speed is not worth mentioning at all. Lien Ru's voice rang out once again. Then, a black sword light pierced through the air and slashed directly at Nietian. Nietian's reaction was very fast, but he was still a step too late. His figure was affected by the sword light, leaving a thin wound on his body. He glanced at the wounds on his body and frowned. He thought to himself, looks like it won't be easy to defeat this guy. Lien Ru's speed exceeded Nietian's expectations, making him feel very troubled. Stinking brat, is it because of my speed that you're a loss? Ha ha ha. Lien Ru's figure was like a cloud of black smoke, flashing back and forth in the void. He sneered and said, I admit that your strength is very strange, but you can only hate me. With my current speed, you won't even be able to hurt me. Boom, boom. As the cold laughter faded, two more black sword shadows appeared in the air. Like two black snakes with their mouths wide open, they pounced towards Nietian. Watch out. When the crowd saw this, they couldn't help but cry out. Their hearts were in their throats. Unconsciously, everyone stood on Nietian's side, as if hoping that he could continue the miracle. If a high god martial artist were to pass the Azure sword field, it would definitely be a miracle. Astral Soul Armor, activate. Nietian could sense that Lien Ru's sword intent was not only fast, but also very powerful. If he didn't defend himself, he would be seriously injured if not killed. As soon as Nietian's voice faded, endless starlight surged out of his body and condensed into a human-shaped armor. Bang! Bang! In the next moment, the two sword shadows landed heavily on the Astral Soul Armor. Two muffled sounds were heard, and two glaring cracks appeared on the enormous armor. Lien Ru, who was in midair, cried out in surprise. He didn't expect that Nietian's defense would be so strong. The crowd gasped when they saw the scene in the air. The strength that Nietian had displayed had shocked them again and again. At this moment, Nietian had become a godlike existence in their hearts. One should know that Nietian's true strength was only at the peak of the High God Realm. If he ascended to the peak of the Supreme God Realm, his strength would be unimaginably terrifying. Stinking brat, there's indeed a terrifying power hidden in your body. Lien Ru's strange voice sounded again. Let's see how long you can last, she said in a cold voice. As soon as her voice faded, the black ray in the air suddenly stopped moving. Then the sword intent surged. The sword light that was as dark as the night bloomed, filling the air with an extremely evil aura. Dark Night Kill. Lien Ru's voice rang out once again, sounding extremely shrill. In the next moment, a terrifying black sword shadow appeared in the air. Like a black dragon, it surged forth at an incredible speed towards Nietian. Nietian frowned slightly. He immediately felt the pressure. The corner of his mouth twitched slightly. Astral Soul Shield, activate. Extreme Wind Firmament Battle Armor, activate. Boom, boom. Astral energy gushed forth as countless rays of starlight gathered together, forming a starlight shield that wrapped around the Astral Soul Armor. At the same time, the Extreme Wind Firmament Battle Armor also activated at the same time, transforming into formless energy that circulated around the Astral Soul Shield. Rumble. The black sword shadow was like a gigantic mountain as it descended. The sword tip landed on the Astral Soul Armor, causing a deafening explosion to ring out in the air. Instantly, a violent wave of sword intent gushed out from the center of the collision, spreading out in all directions. What a terrifying power! Everyone in the spectator stands felt the violent aura rushing towards them and immediately cried out. Those weaker martial artists actually vomited blood on the spot from the impact of this aura. Boom! Crack, crack, crack. In the next moment, a crisp tearing sound rang out. Cracks appeared on the Astral Soul Armor, as though it would shatter at any moment. Stinking brat, die. Lien Ru suddenly appeared. He wouldn't let go of such a good opportunity to kill Nietian. Instantly, sword intent surged out of his body, intending to kill Nietian in one fell swoop. You want to kill me now? You're too naive. Nietian saw Lien Ru's figure appear, and his lips curled into a cold smile, following which his entire body surged with sword intent. Suddenly, 12 huge sword shadows formed from sword intent appeared in the air. Lien Ru suddenly felt a huge pressure from the sword and couldn't help but be stunned. It's too late now. Niet Tianling laughed and stared at Lien Ru with a murderous look. He lured Lien Ru into attacking and purposely gave him an opening so that Lien Ru would think that he could kill him directly. Unfortunately, Nietian wasn't defending at all. Instead, he was forcing Lien Ru to attack with all his might. This way, Lien Ru would let down his guard. And at this moment, Nietian activated the 12 Heaven Slaying Sword formation. You assassin, so this is all you amount to. Nietian smirked and said, this battle is over. Chapter 1943. Boom! Sword shadows rained down from the sky, producing a terrifying roar in the air. Lien Ru felt an overwhelming pressure bearing down on him. He raised his head abruptly, his eyes filled with fear. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. At this moment, he felt the aura of death. He wanted to escape, but found that the space around him was filled with a huge pressure that prevented him from moving. In the next moment, the sword shadows rained down, drowning Lien Ru's figure in them. Rumble. The moment the sword shadows landed on the ground, the earth shook and the ground was torn apart. Waves of air shot up into the sky. Under the impact of the sword will, the soil, sand, and stones were directly crushed. After a long time, the rolling, turbid waves receded, and a figure appeared in the void. His silver hair fluttered in the wind. It was Nietian. He's finally dead, murmured Nietian as he stood in the air. The corners of his mouth curled up into a smile. Under the impact of the 12 Heaven Slaying Sword formation, Lien Ru's body was completely obliterated. He was one of the top Ni Lin assassins, one of the 13 Ni Lin stings, but in the end he was killed by Nietian's sword. Lien Ru would never have dreamed that he, who had killed countless people, would die in the hands of a high god martial artist. The scene once again fell into a deathly silence. Countless eyes looked at Nietian in horror, the shock in their hearts written all over their faces. Nietian was just too strong, so strong that it made people's hair stand on end. At the same time, in the VIP lounge. Ow, how many people has it been? Gongsun Sheng stood up abruptly, beads of sweat oozing from his forehead. He looked at Third Lady Gongsun beside him and asked, as if he had just woken up from a dream. Third Lady Gongsun's pretty face was filled with horror. She swallowed for a while before she reacted and said in a trembling voice, "It seems to be the 9th person." Gongsun Sheng was scared out of his wits, while Third Lady Gongsun was completely shocked. On the other side, Xian Zongfeng's face was lifeless, his forehead was dripping with cold sweat, and even his tailbone was cold. He had never imagined that the Ni Lin assassin he had carefully arranged would die in the hands of Nietian. Everything felt like a dream. He couldn't believe it. Trash. Trash. What bullshit 13 reverse scale thorns. They're all F**king trash. After a while, Xian Zongfeng calmed down a little and roared angrily in his heart. Then, a cold expression appeared on his face, and he said darkly, "Fortunately, I still have one last move." Xian Zongfeng had made up his mind to kill Nietian. Other than the reverse scale killer, Lien Ru, he still had a trump card. Now, it seemed that it was time to reveal his trump card. In another VIP room, Lu Yinger's face was yellow. It took a long time for some color to return her face. She thought hatefully, Lien Ru, in the end, you still failed." LV Yinger had already warned Lien Ru, but she was still too careless. Lien Ru was in too much of a hurry to kill Nietian, which was why the latter seized the opportunity and killed her with a single slash. If Lien Ru could slowly drag it out with Nietian, with his advantage in speed, it would not be easy for Nietian to win this match. But now, it was useless to say anything. Lien Ru had already died in the hands of Nietian, and LV Yinger did not know how to explain this to Xian Zongfeng. At this moment, Nietian stood in the sky above the Shura sword field. His eyes were trembling slightly, and the corner of his mouth was slightly raised as he murmured, "There's still one last opponent. Who will it be?" Apart from Lien Ru, the previous 9 opponents basically did not make Nietian feel pressured, and they did not consume much of his strength. As for the last opponent, Nietian guessed that it must be someone more terrifying than Lien Ru. Fortunately, he still maintained a considerable amount of strength, so he did not panic. Nietian suddenly raised his head and looked at the black-clothed referee strangely. He said in a cold voice, "The last one." The black-clothed referee's face was also very ugly at this moment. He did not pay attention to Nietian, but looked elsewhere. At this moment, the Shura sword field was dead silent. After witnessing Nietian's combat strength with their own eyes, ordinary people would not have the courage to stand up and challenge him. "Let me fight you." Just when the atmosphere was dead silent, a cold voice was heard. Then, a black-clothed figure appeared in the air and confronted Nietian. The black-clothed swordsman's face was hidden under a black robe, so no one could see his appearance. However, when Nietian sensed the black-clothed swordsman's aura and heard the latter's voice, he could not help but be surprised. He then said in a cold voice, "The last opponent is you. I let you escape last time, but it won't be so easy this time," the black-clothed swordsman said coldly. At this moment, the black-clothed swordsman who appeared in front of Nietian was none other than the person who gave him the Crimson Sword Infant a few days ago, Hei Feng. Xian Zongfeng's last trump card was Hei Feng. Yes, the black-clothed referee in the sky was shocked when he saw Hei Feng, and he almost shouted. He knew Hei Feng, who was the heaven sword soul of the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. He also knew that Hei Feng was Xian Zongfeng's subordinate. The black-clothed referee could not understand how Nietian had offended Xian Zongfeng to the point that Xian Zongfeng was willing to use the heaven sword soul of the Shenwu Sword Pagoda to kill him. In fact, Nietian had not offended Xian Zongfeng at all, but because he knew too much, Xian Zongfeng had to kill him. In the VIP room, Xian Zongfeng saw Hei Feng and thought to himself, "Hei Feng, don't disappoint me again." Gong Sun Sheng, who was next to Xian Zongfeng, was slightly surprised. Why did he feel that Nietian's last opponent was familiar? It looked like someone from the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. Gong Sun Sheng was not sure. Even though he was the owner of the Shenwu Sword Pagoda, it was impossible for him to know everyone from the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. He couldn't help but glance at Xian Zongfeng, who was looking at the Shura sword field seriously. Gong Sun Sheng frowned. Even though he was confused, he didn't say anything. Even if he suspected that Hei Feng was from the Shenwu Sword Pagoda, he wouldn't point it out because he didn't want to see Nietian win. Hei Feng was a mid-stage paramount god, and his sword Dao was at the elementary level. He was definitely a strong opponent for Nietian. Whether or not Nietian could pass the Shura sword field would depend on Hei Feng's performance. In the sky above the Shura sword field, Nietian stared at Hei Feng and said, "I really want to know who you are." Hei Feng laughed and said, "You've already guessed it. Why bother asking? You're quite honest." Nietian's eyes narrowed, and he said, "If I'm not wrong, you're from the Shenwu Sword Pagoda and Xian Zongfeng's subordinate, right?" Nietian didn't ask directly because Xian Zongfeng was watching. Plus, he couldn't say it out loud. "Humph," Hei Feng sneered and replied, "You know too much, so you must die today." Nietian's expression changed slightly. Although he firmly believed in his own speculation, he was still surprised that Black Wind had tacitly admitted it. Chapter 1944. High up in the sky, Nietian and Black Wind were locked in a stalemate. Everyone's eyes were focused on them, and they couldn't help but start discussing. "The silver-haired kid is too scary. I can't believe he actually made it to the final battle. But his opponent is even more terrifying. He's a mid-paramount god." Yeah, a mid-paramount god. Even in the 9 realms, he'd be a terrifying figure. "I'm afraid the silver-haired kid won't be able to win this final battle. Nyetian turned a deaf ear to the voices of the crowd. He was determined to win this final battle. Anyone who dared to stand in his way would only have one fate, death. Black Wind glared at Nyetian and said, "Kid, do you know how arrogant you are?" "I'm arrogant because I have what it takes to be arrogant," Nyetianling replied coldly, and the black magical symbols around him grew even more violent. "Is that so?" Black Wind laughed coldly, then roared, "Let's see how arrogant you can be in front of my absolute strength." With that, Black Wind's figure flickered, and he seemed to transform into an enormous tempest. Boundless Sword will shot out, transforming into millions upon millions of swords. They were like a torrential downpour, blotting out the sky and covering the earth as they bore down on Nyetian. Nyetian's eyes darkened, and he stabbed out with his sword, sending out a sword shadow in an attempt to block the countless swords. But as soon as he made his move, something strange happened. The swords in the air seemed to come to life and suddenly changed directions. Like a swarm of locusts, they transformed into a storm of swords that attacked Nyetian from the left and right. Nyetian was taken aback. This was the first time he had encountered such a strange sword will, and he was caught unprepared. In the blink of an eye, Nyetian reacted and activated his astral soul armor, astral soul shield, and extreme wind firmament armor. Boom! Boom! Chi chi chi! In the next instant, the two sword blades collided with the astral soul shield. Thunderous sounds rang out in the air as boundless sword light shot out. Nyetian felt a terrifying pressure coming at him, and the defense around his body was being shattered bit by bit. "Stinking brat, I'd like to see how you're going to block my attack with your strength." Black Wind's voice resounded. It was incomparably sinister. His entire body was filled with terrifying sword shadows, like a storm. Suddenly, the two sword blades in the air became even more terrifying, fiercely attacking towards Nyetian. For a moment, Nyetian fell into a situation of life and death. He struggled to hold on. If his defense was broken, he would use his flesh and blood to resist the terrifying storm of swords. If that really happened, even if he didn't die, he would be severely injured. Black Wind's fighting style was too strange. Nyetian couldn't react in time, which caused him to be in danger. Black Wind was a mid-stage paramount god, and his strength far surpassed that of Nyetian. Adding on the fact that he had the absolute advantage, the situation was very favorable to him. Chi chi chi. The storm of swords continued to attack, and ear-piercing sounds rang out in the air. Nyetian's figure was forced back in the air. Nyetian kept releasing star energy to support the astral soul shield and astral soul armor. But Black Wind's strength was too strong, and his sword intent was also very terrifying. It was breaking through Nyetian's defense bit by bit. Everyone was shocked by the scene in the air, and they didn't even dare to breathe loudly. In the VIP lounge, Gongsun Xingji, Xian Zongfeng, and the rest all stood up, their eyes trembling. They were looking forward to the scene of Nyetian being killed by Black Wind. Third Lady Gongsun, Gui Wu Guangsha, and the rest all had their hearts in their throats. Of course, they didn't want Nyetian to be killed. "No, I can't let this go on." In the air, Nyetian frowned, and he shouted in his heart, "If I continue to fight with this guy, I definitely won't be able to hold on." At this moment, Black Wind and Nyetian were competing in strength, and it was a competition to see who could last until the end. But Black Wind was a mid-stage paramount god, after all, and the spirit energy in his body was very strong. On the other hand, Nyetian only had the strength of a high god. Even if he borrowed the power of the three great forbidden skills to increase his strength to the peak of Overgod, he still couldn't be compared to Black Wind. Moreover, Nyetian had used up some of his strength in the previous battle. So if they continued to fight, it would be very disadvantageous for Nyetian. Thinking of this, Nyetian didn't dare to hesitate anymore. The 9 dragon veins in his body began to revolve crazily, and waves of mighty dragon energy appeared, forming a thunderous dragon energy ocean behind him. Seeing this, Black Wind's eyes couldn't help but narrow. He never thought that Nyetian could release such a huge dragon energy. Wow! The onlookers took in a long breath of cold air and were all struck dumb by what they saw. Who would have thought that after killing so many experts, Nyetian still had a powerful trump card that he hadn't used? Retreat! Nyetian roared, and astral soul wings appeared on his back. Flapping his wings, he retreated rapidly. At the same time, dragon energy instantly condensed behind him, and a giant golden dragon appeared. Its huge body rolled, and it roared. Bang! At this instant, the astral soul armor, astral soul shield, and extreme wind firmament battle armor. These 3 layers of defense were directly shattered. The fearsome storm of swords gushed forth like water from a broken dam, yet it was blocked by the crimson golden dragon. Nyetian seized the opportunity and flapped his wings. He retreated tens of thousands of meters away. Rumble! Chi, chi, chi. At this moment, a terrifying blade storm suddenly erupted and swallowed the crimson golden dragon. Seeing this, Nyetian couldn't help but gasp, and his eyes trembled. Fortunately, he was very decisive. If he had been 1 step slower, he would have been swallowed by the storm of swords. He got away. Black Wind steadied himself and let out a cry of surprise. Then he glared at Nyetian with killing intent in his eyes and said coldly, "Brat, you've used up most of your energy. Let's see how you're going to fight next." As Black Wind spoke, the storm of swords returned to his side, like 2 giant snakes standing upright on either side of him, emanating a fierce aura. Nyetian frowned, and his face paled. Using the power of the dragon bloodline had indeed taken a lot out of him, and he could sense that the talismans around him wouldn't last much longer. In the coming battle, Nyetian had to cut the Gordian knot. If it had been a few days ago, Nyetian wouldn't have been able to put up a fight against an expert like Black Wind. But now his strength had improved, and his Tao of the Sword had improved. He could now fight a mid-stage paramount god. The crowd's eyes shone brightly, as if they were waiting for Nyetian to show an even more terrifying trump card. Ever since Nyetian stepped into the Shura sword field, he had brought too much shock to the crowd. Therefore, they could accept any power he showed now. He's my last opponent, so there's no need to hold back. Let's go all out. The corner of Nyetian's mouth twitched. Then, the power of stars surged out of him, and endless starlight flickered, filling every corner of the Shura sword field. Chapter 1945. The moment the astral river flight restriction was activated, a boundless pressure from the starry sky appeared and filled the entire Ashura sword field. What kind of power is this? It's so terrifying. Everyone felt a tightness in their chests, and they immediately cried out in shock. Nyetian didn't disappoint them. He had shown an even more terrifying trump card. Everyone was dumbfounded. It was hard to imagine that Nyetian could release such a terrifying power that made everyone feel pressured. However, most of the people here were swordsmen, and few of them understood boundaries. Therefore, I didn't know that Nyetian was using boundary power. Black Wind could feel the pressure coming from space. It was actually suppressing his strength, and he couldn't help but let out a cry of surprise. All right, Nyetian activated the astral river flight restriction, and his eyes shone with sharpness. He roared, "Now, let's fight to our heart's content. You're courting death." Black Wind roared, and then his figure moved. 2 more sword blade storms swept out, but their speed and power were much weaker than before. The astral river flight restriction was a boundary formed by the power of the stars, and it had a suppressive force on everyone. The power of the stars was the origin of power, and it could suppress all kinds of power. At this moment, Black Wind's strength was obviously suppressed. Although he was a mid-stage paramount god, his current battle strength was not much stronger than an early-stage paramount god. On the other hand, Nyetian's strength had increased significantly under the astral river flight restriction. Die! Black Wind roared, and the 2 sword blade storms were like huge tornadoes, madly attacking Nyetian. Earthcrafting reverse kill, heavenly crafting ultimate kill. Seeing this, Nyetian wasn't afraid at all. He struck out with his sword, and a huge sword will condensed into two heaven and earth snakes, whistling out, and directly collided with the two sword blade storms. Rumble. In the void, the sword blade storms collided with the heaven and earth snakes, like four giant snakes, entangling and strangling each other, causing ear-piercing sounds in the air. How is this possible? Seeing this, Heifeng's eyes couldn't help but tremble. The shock in his heart was revealed in his eyes. Just a moment ago, his strength was still absolutely suppressing Nie Tian, but now Nie Tian could actually face him head-on. This was too strange. In the VIP room, Gong Sunsheng and Xian Zongfeng's faces turned pale when they saw this scene. They were horrified. Gong Sunsheng forced himself to calm down and said in a deep voice, "Xian Zongfeng, what kind of power did that kid use? Why have I never seen this kind of power before?" He sensed Nie Tian's astral energy, and it actually gave him a very mysterious feeling. Moreover, this kind of energy was very vast and boundless, as though it contained everything. It was extremely strange. I don't know either. Xian Zongfeng's eyes were trembling as he shook his head subconsciously. At this moment, he was unable to remain calm any longer. He even felt that Heifeng was bound to lose this battle, and was just waiting to be slaughtered by Nie Tian. Nie Tian's strength was far beyond Xian Zongfeng's expectations. It seemed that Nie Tian was invincible. Xian Zongfeng was a peak paramount god expert, but he couldn't see the limit of Nie Tian's strength. Gue Wu Quangsha's gaze was also sluggish. He had originally thought that he already had a very good understanding of Nie Tian. However, after today's Azura sword field, he knew that Nie Tian's body was still concealing too many secrets that shocked him. What's wrong? Are you panicking? Nie Tian looked at Heifeng with a gloomy gaze, and the corners of his mouth curled up into an evil smile. He said in a cold voice, "I must win this battle. You are blocking my way, so you must die." As the word die fell, Nie Tian's figure flickered. Astral soul armor appeared around his body. An astral soul flame appeared on the edge of his sword. In the forbidden space of the astral river, he used all the power of the stars so that he could exert his strength to the fullest. Starfire incinerates the sea. Nie Tian roared and slashed out with his sword. A terrifying sword will rolled out, and a flaming sword shadow appeared in the air. It was boundless and mighty, and it pressed down on Heifeng. Feeling the terrifying pressure, Heifeng hurriedly controlled the storm of swords to defend himself. The countless swords revolved around him, forming a blade shield. Rumble! The flaming sword's shadow fell and slashed on the blade shield, but it couldn't break it. Heifeng's sword will was indeed strange. The sword will condensed into a sword, and the sword could change its shape freely. It could be used to attack or defend, and it was very flexible. Fortunately, Nie Tian had improved his strength a few days ago. Otherwise, he wouldn't be a match for Heifeng. The surging flaming sword shadow was consumed by the blade shield, and Heifeng's figure appeared again. His eyes were extremely vicious, and he looked very embarrassed. He had never imagined that Nie Tian would be able to force him to this point. "Stinking brat, you've really pissed me off." Black Wind roared furiously. His entire body surged with even more berserk blades. They spun crazily around his body, causing his entire body to turn into a terrifying storm of blades. It was like a black hurricane spiraling in the air. "Are you going to go all out?" Seeing this, the corner of Nie Tian's mouth twitched, and he murmured, "Fortunately, I'm prepared. It's time to use the chaotic flame." As the words left his mouth, Nie Tian's body flickered, and the hellfire crucible appeared behind him. "What's that?" The crowd was flabbergasted, and many people let out strange cries. Nie Tian's trump cards were truly endless, and they had shocked the crowd again and again. Nie Tian looked at the hellfire crucible and raised his hand. A moment later, a ball of flame of primal chaos appeared, surrounded by twinkling starlight. As soon as Nie Tian activated the forbidden starry river, he placed the flame of primal chaos into the hellfire crucible. He wanted to infuse the power of the stars into the flame of primal chaos. That way, The flame of primal chaos would be able to unleash even more terrifying power within the forbidden starry river. Heifeng looked at the flame of primal chaos in Nietion's hand and couldn't help but tremble. But he had no way out. He could only fight to the death. Black Night Storm kill. Black Wind made up his mind and let out a wild roar. The storm of swords around him started to rumble as it shot towards Nietion like a raging snake. Crafty Tao of heaven and earth kill. Nietion's eyes flashed with killing intent. The flame of primal chaos danced in his hand, and he stabbed out with it. The crafty Tao of heaven and earth appeared, and in the blink of an eye, they merged into one, becoming a terrifying serpent. Everyone's gaze suddenly sank at this moment, and their nerves were stretched taut. Everyone knew that the next moment would be the moment of life and death for Nietion and Heifeng. Rumble. Under the watchful eyes of countless people, the flame Tao of primal chaos and the storm of swords collided. A huge explosion rang out, and the shock waves spread out in all directions. Suddenly, sword will, sword light, flames, starlight, and countless other types of power wreak havoc in the air. Chapter 1946. Rumble. In the sky above the Shura sword field, ear-piercing noises could be heard. The terrifying power was wreaking havoc, turning the sky into chaos. The sword radiance and flames lasted for a long time. Nietion and Black Wind were nowhere to be seen. The eyes of the crowd trembled, but they didn't blink, fearing that they would miss something. After a long time, the turbid waves in the sky gradually dissipated. Two figures appeared in the sky. Nietion stood in the air. His face was as pale as a piece of paper, but his body was very clean. His eyes were sharp and firm. On the other hand, Heifeng's entire body was dripping with blood, and his body was trembling nonstop. He was like a broken leaf in a storm, a small boat in a stormy sea, and could be completely submerged at any time. The crowd couldn't help but tremble violently. They all took a deep breath and felt chills running down their spines. In the end, Nietion won the battle. In the VIP room, Gongsun Shengji and Xian Zongfeng's expressions were stiff. They both felt as if there was a huge stone pressing on their chests, making them feel suffocated. Especially Xian Zongfeng. His cheeks were covered in cold sweat. His face was pale, and his eyes were trembling. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. Black Wind, the divine martial sword pagoda's heaven sword soul, had lost. Xian Zongfeng stared at Black Wind. He hoped that Black Wind could shake off the blood on his body and continue to fight with Nietion. Nietion was already at the end of his rope. There was not much energy left in his body. He no longer had the strength to fight. If Black Wind didn't die, Nietion would be in danger. But Xian Zongfeng knew that what he was thinking was just wishful thinking. He could clearly feel that there was a very violent sword intent surging in Black Wind's body, destroying all the meridians in his body. Black Wind was not far from death. He only had one breath left. At this moment, Black Wind's figure moved. He used the last of his strength to speak, but his voice was stuttering. Why are you so strong? Right when he spoke the last word, his body was finally unable to endure the violent sword insight within his body, and it suddenly shook before directly exploding into a bloody mist that dissipated in space. Black Wind, a mid-paramount god, and sole heaven sword soul of the divine martial sword pagoda, had died a horrible death. The sound of Heifeng's body exploding caused everyone to be shocked. Their faces were filled with shock, and their eyes were slightly sluggish. They had yet to recover from the huge shock. Seeing Black Wind die, Nietion couldn't help but let out a long sigh of relief. His pale face relaxed a lot. If Black Wind could withstand the impact of this sword, Nietion really didn't know how the battle would turn out. Nietion's body moved slightly. His body trembled, and he spat out a mouthful of blood. In the battle at the Azura sword field, he had consumed too much of his spirit power, blood chi, and star energy. At this moment, he was extremely weak, and he could only stand in the void with a single breath. I've won. Nietion took a deep breath and suddenly raised his head. He looked at the black-clothed referee in the sky and said in a clear voice. In the 10 battles at the Azura Sword Field, Nietian had killed 10 people and won the final victory. You've won. The black-clothed referee stared at Nietian in astonishment. Even though Nietian was extremely weak, he could see a terrifying determination in Nietian's eyes. This determination actually caused him to feel inexplicably flustered. Only when Nietian heard the word win from the black-garb referee's mouth did he completely relax. At this time, in one of the VIP lounges, Lu Yinger, the reverse-scale killer, stared coldly at Nietian. She said viciously in her heart, "Nietian, I'll remember your name. You killed one of the 13 reverse-scale thorns. The reverse-scale killer will definitely not let you off." Originally, Lu Yinger had hoped that Black Wind would be able to kill Nietian and avenge Lien Ru. However, the outcome before her eyes had disappointed her greatly. At this moment, she completely understood that Lien Ru's death at the hands of Nietian was not an accident. When Nietian had fought Lien Ru, he had not even used his full strength. Lu Yinger even felt that Nietian might not have used his full strength to kill Black Wind. Her guess was rather accurate. This was because Nietian still had one trump card that he had not used, the 9-pole Chaos Beast. Nietian had a principle when he fought. He would never use the 9th Extreme Chaos Beast until the very last moment. That was because the 9th Extreme Chaos Beast was too scary. The commotion it could cause would be much scarier than what was happening right now. As soon as Lu Yinger finished speaking, her figure moved. Like a green light, she disappeared. As Nietian stood in the Azura Sword Field, he felt as though a green shadow had flashed past his eyes. However, very quickly it disappeared. He only felt that it was strange, but he did not pay much attention to it. After all, he had more important things to do. He had passed the Azura Sword Field, but this was not his goal. His real goal was to bring forward the evil edge sword meat. Next, it was time for Gong Sun Sheng to fulfill his promise. With these thoughts in mind, Nietian took a deep breath, and his complexion turned slightly better. Then, he looked towards the VIP room and said in a clear voice, "Sword Master Divine and Sword Master Martial, I passed the Shura Sword Field. Now it's time for you to fulfill your promise." His calm voice was neither fast nor slow, neither humble nor arrogant. However, when it landed in everyone's ears, it was like a sudden clap of thunder. Everyone was dazed. Divine Sword Lord? Martial Sword Lord? Did this silver-haired kid become muddle-headed from the battle? Why are these two lords here? The crowd was shocked and exclaimed. The Divine Martial Sword Lord was a supreme figure in the Divine Martial Sword Pagoda. Given their status, how could they appear here? As soon as Nietian finished his sentence, there was no response from the VIP room for a long time. He was not in a hurry either. He stood in the air and waited quietly. In the VIP room, Gong Sun Sheng's expression was extremely ugly. He was more conflicted than if he had eaten *T. He had never thought that Nietian would force him to show himself at this moment. Xian Zongfeng's expression was also ugly. His expression was twisted, making him look pitiful. How could he have imagined that the originally flawless killing trap would turn out like this in the end? Nietian's strength had far exceeded his expectations. His killing trap had turned into a stage for Gong Sun Sheng to show off his strength. The muscles on Gong Sun Sheng's face twitched. He was hesitating if he should walk out. "Father," Third Lady Gong Sun panicked and said, "With your status, you won't go back on your word to a junior, right?" "Third Lady, how can you talk to Brother Gong Sun like that? He's your father." Xian Zongfeng's expression froze, and he glared at Third Lady Gong Sun. He wished that Gong Sun Sheng would go back on his word. "Say no more." Gong Sun Sheng suddenly spoke with his eyes wide open. "I, Gong Sun Sheng, am the Divine Sword Master of the Divine Martial Sword Pagoda, the #1 swordsman in the 9 realms. How can I go back on my word to a kid?" Chapter 1947. Gong Sun Sheng appeared in front of Nietian, his fierce eyes fixed on him. Face grim, he didn't say anything. His sudden appearance caused the spectators and the spectator stands to fall into an uproar as they began to discuss among themselves. "Huh? Who is this fat guy? His body size is too exaggerated. Why did he suddenly appear? Is he trying to scare someone to death? No. This fat old man's aura is so strong. He's like a sea of sword essence just by standing there. I tried to sense it, but my divine sense was almost swallowed by the sword essence. This body size, this aura, this person seems to be the divine sword master of the divine martial sword pagoda. Don't talk nonsense. The divine sword master is the #1 swordsman in the 9 regions. He should be a wise and peerless swordsman. How can he be a big meatball? Most of the spectators had never seen Gongsun Shengji before. They had only heard of his name, but did not know what he looked like. Therefore, Gongsun Shengji's appearance made everyone laugh. In fact, they cannot be blamed for this. The key was that Gongsun Shengji's body size was too exaggerated. Normal people would be shocked if they saw him. Lord Divine Sword Master. The others did not recognize Gongsun Shengji, but the black-clothed referee did. After a moment of shock, he quickly bowed and greeted Gongsun Shengji. When everyone saw the black-clothed referee's action, they suddenly realized that this big meatball was really the divine sword master, Gongsun Shengji. Everyone shut up. Gongsun Sheng was already upset, so how could he be in the mood to listen to the gossip of others? He let out a low roar that contained surging sword intent. Everyone felt their chests tighten, as if they were suffocating. Many of the weaker ones spat out blood, and their faces turned as white as paper. As soon as Gongsun Shengji's voice fell, the entire Ashura sword grounds became dead silent. Nie Tian looked at Gongsun Shengji calmly and said with a faint smile, "Divine Sword Master, you have come out. Where is the other Divine Sword Master?" Gongsun Sheng's eyes trembled. Coldly, he glanced at Nie Tian. He was obviously very angry, but he still growled, "Xian Zongfeng, come out." Xian Zongfeng was in the VIP room. He originally thought that he didn't have to go out, but since Gongsun Sheng had spoken, he couldn't hide anymore. He could only move and show himself. The crowd was stunned. Although they had never seen Xian Zongfeng before, his name was well known. Shock was written all over their faces as they looked at Gongsun Shengji and Xian Zongfeng with trembling eyes. Who would have thought that Nie Tian would call out the 2 sword masters of the Shenwu Sword Pagoda in front of everyone? Moreover, looking at the expressions of these 2 sword masters, it seemed that they were unwilling to come out and were forced out by Nie Tian. "Nie Tian, what are you trying to do?" Gongsun Sheng looked at Nie Tian with a gloomy gaze. He was a sword master, but he was forced to this point by a young boy. It was really frustrating. 2 sword masters. Nie Tian smiled faintly and bowed slightly. He put on a good show and said, "The 2 sword masters had an agreement with me. As long as I pass the Shura sword field, the 2 sword masters will agree to my condition and bring forward the Evil Edge sword competition. Now that I have done it, it is time for the 2 sword masters to fulfill their promise." Nie Tian called himself sword master and Xian Zongfeng Jr. on purpose. He purposely made Gongsun Sheng and Xian Zongfeng's status too high so that they couldn't go back on their words. As soon as Nie Tian finished speaking, the crowd finally understood why the 2 sword masters would appear here. It turned out that they had an agreement with Nie Tian. This agreement also shocked the crowd. No one had expected that the 2 sword masters of the divine and martial sects would use the Evil Edge sword competition as a wager against Nie Tian. This was too unexpected. No one knew what Nie Tian had done to make the sword master of divine martial agree to such an agreement. Gongsun Sheng and Xian Zongfeng, one fat and one skinny, froze on the spot. Their faces were as dark as could be. They didn't expect Nie Tian to be so arrogant and force them to fulfill their promise in front of so many people. The reason why Nie Tian had called them out was so that they could fulfill their promise. Nie Tian knew that Xian Zongfeng was a sinister guy, so it was better to settle the Evil Edge sword competition first so that he could be at ease. Gongsun Sheng remained silent with a livid face. With his status, of course he wouldn't break his promise. "Nie Tian, we did have an agreement with you, but the Evil Edge sword competition is a big deal, so..." Xian Zongfeng's face twitched. He thought for a while and stepped forward, but before he could finish, he was interrupted by Nie Tian. "Sword Master Wu, do you mean that you want to break your promise?" Nie Tian said coldly. His attitude instantly changed from respectful to tough. I'm not breaking my promise. It's just that this is a big deal, and we need to discuss it. Xian Zongfeng's face stiffened. He didn't expect Nie Tian to change his attitude so quickly. Discuss? How do we discuss something that we've already agreed on? Nie Tian didn't show any mercy to Xian Zongfeng. He sneered and looked at Gong Sun Sheng. Sword Master of Divine Martial Sword, Sword Master Wu, you two are the most influential figures in the sword world. The Shenwu Sword Pagoda is the #1 sword sect in the Nine Realms, and Senior Gongsun is the #1 sword master in the Nine Realms. You two wouldn't go back on your words with a junior like me, would you? Oomph. Nie Tianling chuckled and continued. If that's the case, the reputation of the Shenwu Sword Pagoda for nearly 1,000,000 years will be ruined in the hands of the two sword masters. Nie Tianling then looked at Gongsun Sheng and Xian Zongfeng with a gloomy face. Since he had forced the two out, he had to get rid of the evil edge sword competition, even if he had to risk offending the two completely. Nie Tian, considering that you're just a junior, I won't lower myself to your level. Don't push your luck. Xian Zongfeng was also angered by Nie Tian. His face darkened and his tone became much colder. What? Sword Master Wu failed to go back on his words. Do you want to fight me now? Nie Tian smiled and took a step forward without fear. This? Everyone gasped and thought to themselves, this silver-haired young man is so brave. He's not backing down even when facing the two sword masters of the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. I'm afraid there aren't many people with such courage in the Nine Realms. Nie Tian was indeed risking his life this time. If Xian Zongfeng or Gongsun Sheng attack him now, he would definitely die. But he believed that Gongsun Sheng wouldn't do anything. Gongsun Sheng might look arrogant and gloomy, but he had the pride of a swordsman. There was no way he would attack a junior swordsman in front of so many people. Xian Zongfeng looked at Nie Tian with a gloomy face, his eyes filled with killing intent. But he didn't dare to do anything because Gongsun Sheng was right next to him. The atmosphere was suffocating. Everyone's eyes were focused on Gongsun Shengji, waiting for his reaction. Chapter 1948. 3 months later, the evil edge sword competition would begin. Gongsun Shengji's words stunned everyone. Their eyes widened and they couldn't believe their ears. Who would have thought that Gongsun Shengji would actually agree to Nie Tian's request and bring forward the evil edge sword competition? Brother Gongsun, this... Xian Zongfeng was stunned for a few seconds before he finally reacted. He looked at Gongsun Shengji in horror and couldn't say a word. It's settled then. Gongsun Shengji, will never be a villain who goes back on his word. Gongsun Shengji said cold, finally showing some of his proper bearing. Godly sword master's words carry enormous weight. I respect you. Nie Tian smiled and bowed slightly to Gongsun Shengji. He looked relaxed, but he was actually very nervous, fearing that Gongsun Shengji wouldn't relent. Fortunately, Gongsun Shengji wasn't a villain and could at least afford to lose. Humph! Gongsun Shengji snorted, then turned around and left. Xian Zongfeng stood there with a stiff expression. He gave Nie Tian a sinister look and then left as well. After the two sword masters left, the entire Shura sword ground was in an uproar. Everyone was shocked and couldn't believe what had just happened. Did I hear it right? The Shenwu Sword Pagoda really brought forward the Evil Edge sword competition? Absolutely. The Evil Edge sword competition that was held every 30,000 years was brought forward. This news is too shocking. Who the hell is that silver-haired kid? Not only did he pass the Azure Sword Field as a high-level deity, but he also forced the two sword masters of the Shenwu Sword Pagoda to bring forward the Evil Edge sword duel. That's terrifying. The crowd discussed animatedly as they looked at Nie Tian with even more fear in their eyes. Nie Tian didn't pay any attention to the crowd's reactions as he flashed into the VIP lounge. By then, Gongsun Sanyang had already left, leaving only Guiwu Quangsha and the others. Nie Tian, are you all right? Guiwu Quangsha stepped forward and asked nervously when he saw Nie Tian. Nie Tian's face was pale, but his aura was very stable. He faintly smiled and said, I'm fine. I just used up too much energy. I'll be fine after some rest. Nie Tian, the evil edge sword meet has been brought forward. That's great. We can also participate in the evil edge sword meet now. Gue Wukong said excitedly. Jian Jingyan nodded. He was obviously very happy. The wretched edge sword discourse will be held in 3 months, Nie Tian said, smiling. The two of you need to work hard on your cultivation. Hopefully, you'll reach the paramount god level before the sword discourse begins. After emerging from the domain of darkness and gloom, Jin Shockcloud and Ghost Wukong had tempered themselves on the path of slaughter and were now on the verge of becoming paramount gods. If nothing unexpected happened, they should be able to reach the early paramount god level within 3 months. Jian Jingyun and Gue Wuchang nodded their heads heavily, appearing to be brimming with confidence. Nie Tian thought for a moment, then said, Jian Jingyun, Gue Wuchang, for the next 3 months, you too can cultivate in the 9 ultimates. The god power there is even denser. It will be of great help to your cultivation. I couldn't ask for more. Gue Wuchang chuckled, looking very happy. Jian Jingyun also nodded. Both of them had the same idea, but were too embarrassed to say it out loud. Nie Tian nodded, then took out the 9 ultimates for Jian Jingyun and Gue Wuchang to enter. The two of them would spend the next 3 months cultivating bitterly. Exalted Gue Wuchang, let's go back to the City Lord's mansion, Nie Tian said, then headed back to the City Lord's mansion with Gue Wuquangsha. Nie Tian was a little worried about Sakura, afraid that Xian Zongfeng would make a move on him. After returning to the City Lord's mansion, Nie Tian went to find Sakura, and after confirming that he was fine, he felt a lot more at ease. He felt strange. According to Xian Zongfeng's temperament, it was impossible for him to not make a move on Sakura. How could he know that Xian Zongfeng wanted a plant of blood-weeping sword soul in Sakura's body? Unfortunately, Sakura's sword Dao realm was too high. A normal blood-weeping sword soul couldn't be planted in his body. Nie Tian didn't think too much about it. He warned Sakura to be careful and not to leave the City Lord's mansion if there was nothing important. Sakura was relatively safe in the City Lord's mansion. No matter how arrogant Xian Zongfeng was, he wouldn't dare to make a move in front of Gongsun Sheng. Now, Nie Tian was sure that Gongsun Sheng didn't know about Xian Zongfeng. It seemed that Xian Zongfeng hid it very well. However, Gongsun Sheng was a very stubborn old man. If Nie Tian told him about Xian Zongfeng's matter, the former would not believe it. Instead, he would be even more guarded against Nie Tian. Before getting conclusive evidence, Nie Tian didn't intend to reveal Xian Zongfeng's matter. The matter of the Evil Peak Sword Discourse had been settled. The next step was to wait for the Evil Peak Sword Discourse to begin 3 months later. Nie Tian estimated that after 3 months, Rui Qinyu's fusion with the Path of Massacre would also end. He was looking forward to seeing how strong Rui Qinyu would be after the fusion. After a while, Nie Tian and Gue Wuquangsha returned to the small courtyard. Nie Tian, it was too dangerous just now. You shouldn't have forced Gongsun Sheng to show himself. Gue Wuquangsha looked at Nie Tian and said, still in shock. Although Nie Tian had forced Gongsun Sheng and Xian Zongfeng back into Shura Swordfield, it was a very dangerous thing. However, it was a very dangerous thing to do. If Gongsun Sheng had turned against him, Nie Tian would have been in great danger. Nie Tian smiled faintly and said, although Sword Lord Gongsun is very stubborn, he isn't a cruel and merciless person. So, I gambled once. You gambled with your life. Gue Wuquangsha smiled bitterly and said, if Jian Qingqi knew that you gambled with your life to save him, he would definitely be very happy. I owe Sword Elder. Nie Tian smiled faintly and couldn't help but think of Jian Qingqi. Jian Qingqi was a teacher and a friend to him. When the former was by his side, he helped him a lot. Not only did he save him several times when he was in danger, he also let him know about the wider world of martial arts. Nie Tian did all this for Jian Qingqi. He was willing. Nie Tian, Gongsun Sheng is a very stubborn old man. If you offend him like this, I'm afraid he won't give you any face in the future. Gue Wuquangsha sighed and couldn't help but shake his head. He had some understanding of Gongsun Sheng. After what happened before, Gong Sun Sheng's hatred for Nie Tian was not small. However, with Gong Sun Sheng's identity, he wouldn't go as far as to take revenge on Nie Tian. Gong Sun Sheng wouldn't do anything to Nie Tian, but Xian Zongfeng was different. He was a righteous person with a sanctimonious appearance. After failing to kill Nie Tian this time, Xian Zongfeng would definitely not give up. Instead, he might become even more vicious. Nie Tian smiled faintly and suddenly thought of something. He asked, Lord Guiwu, when we were in the main hall of the City Lord's mansion, Divine Sword Lord's reaction was a bit strange. Originally, he didn't want to kill me, but after knowing that I'm from the Nie clan, he revealed his killing intent. What's going on? Guiwu Quang Sha smiled bitterly and said, Actually, it's my fault. The Nie clan and the Gongsun clan have a long history. I wanted to tell you about it, but I forgot. Chapter 1949. After listening to Guiwu Quang Sha's narration, Nie Tian was stunned for a few seconds before he finally reacted. He bitterly smiled and said, So my father ran away from the wedding back then. How unexpected. Yeah. Guiwu Quang Sha shook his head and said with a smile, Back then, on the wedding day, all the influential figures of the 9 domains were present, but your father ran away during the wedding ceremony, leaving Third Lady Gongsun alone. This matter has indeed disgraced the Gongsun family and even affected the reputation of the divine martial sword pagoda. It's no wonder that old man Gongsun Sheng hates your Nie family so much. The corner of Nie Tian's mouth twitched helplessly. He didn't know why his father ran away from the wedding back then, but he believed that his father was not an irresponsible person. Lord Guiwu, according to what you said, my father publicly ran away from the wedding, so shouldn't Third Lady Gongsun be the one who hates the Nie family the most? Nie Tian suddenly recalled the way Third Lady Gongsun looked at him in the hall and couldn't help but feel strange. I feel that Third Lady Gongsun must have recognized my identity in the hall. But not only did she not want to kill me, but she also tried her best to save me and even knelt down to beg the Divine Sword Master for me. Why? Third Lady Gongsuin's existence played a key role in the success of the Evil Edge Sword competition. If it wasn't for Third Lady Gongsuin's timely appearance in the hall of the City Lord's mansion, Nie Tian might not have been able to keep his life. Logically speaking, Third Lady Gongsun should have been the one who hated Nie Fenghua the most when he ran away from the wedding. Then why did she try her best to help Nie Tian? It's indeed strange. Guiwu Quang Sha slightly furrowed his brows and said, Actually, I've heard a lot about the matter between your father and Third Lady Gongsun. I heard that your father treated Third Lady Gongsun very well, and the two of them have always had a good relationship. There shouldn't be any reason for him to run away from the wedding. Could it be that there's something else that happened back then? Nie Tian was stunned for a moment. Then he smiled and said, No matter what, Third Lady Gongsun saved me, so I should go and thank her. You should thank her. Guiwu Quang Sha nodded his head and said, She should already know your identity. You must tell her to keep a secret. I know. Nie Tian nodded and prepared to look for Third Lady Gongsun. However, just as he turned around and looked outside the small courtyard, he saw a graceful figure appear in the distance. It was none other than Third Lady Gongsun. Lady Gongsun. Nie Tian bowed slightly when he saw Third Lady Gongsun suddenly appear and called out respectfully. Third Lady Gongsun slowly walked over, giving a faint and elegant smile to Nie Tian. She then turned to look at Guiwu Quang Sha and said, Lord Guiwu, I have something to say to Nie Tian. I'll have to trouble you to leave for a while. Okay. Guiwu Quang Sha nodded his head indifferently before turning around and leaving. Nie Tian couldn't help but be stunned. Looking at Third Lady Gongsuin's expression, it seemed that she had something to say to him. Your name is Nie Tian, and your father is Nie Fenghua, right? After waiting for Guiwu Quang Sha to leave, Third Lady Gongsun slowly opened her mouth, her gaze sizing up Nie Tian's body. Yes. Nie Tian didn't deny it. Nodding his head indifferently, he said, Lady Gongsun, if you have something to say, please say it. Nie Tian, I grew up with your father. I see him as an elder brother, and he sees me as a younger sister. If you don't mind, you can call me Aunt. Third Lady Gongsun slowly opened her mouth and said while looking at Nietan, "Thank you for your help today, Aunt." Nietan thought for a while. Not wanting to refuse, he nodded his head in thanks. Third Lady Gongsun elegantly smiled, as if she had thought of many things. She said, "Nietan, do you know? The look in your eyes is really similar to your father's." Nietan slightly nodded his head. He knew that Third Lady Gongsun definitely had something to say to him, but he couldn't rush her directly. He could only worry in his heart. "Nietan, you already know about the matter between me and your father, right?" Third Lady Gongsun paused for a while, before finally getting to the point. "Lord Gui Wu told me a little." Nietan lightly nodded his head, waiting for Third Lady Gongsun to continue. "The look in your eyes is really similar to his." Third Lady Gongsun calmly looked at Nietan, repeating what she had just said. Then she continued, "Actually, the matter between me and your father isn't as simple as it seems. There really is more to it than meets the eye." Nietan's eyes trembled, and he exclaimed in his heart. He was very curious about what had happened between his father and Third Lady Gongsun. "Nietan, the reason why I helped you today is because I owe your father. I want to repay him through you." Third Lady Gongsun looked at Nietan, and her face clearly became gloomy. She recalled many things, and memories of the past suddenly came flooding back like a spring. Seeing Third Lady Gongsun's reaction, Nietan didn't know what to do and could only stand there in a daze. After a long time, Third Lady Gongsun calmed down a lot and began to say, "When I grew up with your father, we could be said to be childhood sweethearts. We knew from a young age that we were engaged to each other and that we were destined to be together. But at that time, we were too young, and we couldn't tell the difference between a man and a woman and a sister. I thought I loved your father, depended on him, and would never leave him for the rest of my life. But one day, I met another man, and everything changed. I slowly came to understand that I didn't love your father at all. It was just a little sister's dependence on her brother. But by the time I understood this, our engagement was already approaching. At that time, I didn't have the courage to tell your father. It wasn't until the day of the wedding that I panicked and secretly told your father everything. At that time, your father's reaction was very calm. He didn't get angry, and he only said a few words to me." At this point, Third Lady Gongsun couldn't help but pause, and her expression became even more solemn. "What did he say?" Nietan couldn't help but curiously ask. He really wanted to know what his father had said to him. For a girl who grew up with him to say such words to him on the wedding day, any man would probably go crazy if they were in her place. Nie Fenghua was still able to maintain her calm back then, and her willpower was truly unparalleled. Third Lady Gongsun took a deep breath to calm herself down and said, "Your father told me that you must be happy, Third Lady." After saying that, he smiled at me. I'll never forget that smile. It was so calm, yet so sincere. After that, your father left under the watchful eyes of countless people. At this point, Third Lady Gongsun let out a long sigh, looking as if a heavy burden had been lifted from her shoulders. "This is the matter between me and your father. Back then, he ran away from the wedding for me. He shouldered the reputation of being unjust for the sake of my future happiness." Chapter 1950. In Third Lady Gongsun's words, Nie Fenghua was simply a peerless good man. In that kind of situation, he actually dared to say such things. In the end, he even ran away from the marriage and took all the blame, all for the sake of the other party's happiness. For Nie Fenghua to be able to do such a thing, it was truly amazing. Nietan asked himself if he could do such a thing. After all these years, Third Lady Gongsun must have felt very guilty. Hence, after she met Nietan and learned of Nietan's identity, she did her best to help Nietan, hoping that she could repay what she owed Nie Fenghua back then through Nietan. Third Lady Gongsun nodded solemnly and said to Nietan, "I know that I wronged your father back then. No matter how you look at me, I will not be angry. Aunt, this is between you and my father. I will not say much. Since my father chose to do what he did back then, he must have his reasons. I have no right to say anything." Nietan faintly smiled and did not blame Third Lady Gongsun. After all, it was something that happened a long time ago, and he had no right to comment. In fact, Tian was a little embarrassed because he had never seen his father before in his life. He really didn't know what kind of person would run away from a marriage like this. After a moment, Tian completely calmed down. After thinking for a moment, he finally asked, "Aunt, so many years have passed. Why haven't you told us the truth? Do you want to see the Gong Sun and Nye families continue to be enemies?" Since there was a hidden story behind what happened back then, Nye Tian felt very strange. Why didn't Third Lady Gong Sun tell the truth? If that was the case, at least the Nye and Gong Sun families would have an opportunity to reconcile. What made Nye Tian even more puzzled was that Third Lady Gong Sun said that she met other men back then, but he didn't see any men by her side. Moreover, if Third Lady Gong Sun's heart belonged to someone else, shouldn't she be with that person? Yet she was still in Shinwu City. This was a little strange. I can't say. Hearing Nye Tian's words, Third Lady Gong Sun couldn't help but become nervous. She looked at Nye Tian and said, "Nye Tian, can you promise me that you won't tell anyone about this?" Nye Tian frowned. His expression became strange as he asked, "Why?" Looking at Third Lady Gong Sun's current reaction, she was actually very flustered, as if she was worried about something. After so many years, Third Lady Gong Sun obviously didn't care about her reputation. She had been hiding the truth for so long, so there must be another reason. "I can't tell you. Please promise me that you won't tell anyone else about this. Okay?" Third Lady Gong Sun was flustered and on the verge of tears. Nye Tian couldn't help but feel even more baffled, but he still nodded and said, "I promise you, I won't reveal this matter." Yes, thank you." Third Lady Gong Sun nodded her head repeatedly, and her nervous expression eased a lot. Nye Tian, on the other hand, was even more baffled. He really couldn't understand why Third Lady Gong Sun would be so secretive about this matter. Could it be because of the man she met? Nye Tian frowned and guessed. He guessed that there was something wrong with the man who was with Third Lady Gong Sun back then. Perhaps his identity wasn't ordinary, so she couldn't say it. However, he was very puzzled. Just what kind of person was it that Third Lady Gong Sun didn't dare to mention? "Auntie, you just said that you met a man. How's that man now?" Nye Tian's eyes flickered as he looked at Third Lady Gong Sun and probed. "Nye Tian, I know you're very puzzled, but I really can't tell you. Please don't ask anymore." Third Lady Gong Sun was very sensitive. Her delicate facial features were twisted together with an awkward expression. "If Auntie says so, then I won't ask anymore." Nye Tian had no choice but to let out a faint smile. He was now basically certain that the reason why Third Lady Gong Sun was so secretive about what happened back then was because of the man she met. Nye Fenghua ran away from the marriage to let Third Lady Gong Sun be happy. However, in the end, Third Lady Gong Sun couldn't be with that man. Nye Tian was very curious. Just what kind of man could actually snatch Third Lady Gong Sun from Nye Fenghua's hands? After a moment of silence, Third Lady Gong Sun suddenly asked, "Nye Tian, why did you bring forward the Evil Edge sword competition? To save someone." Nye Tian nodded lightly. "Save someone? Save who?" Third Lady Gong Sun was stunned. She didn't know who was so important to Nye Tian that he was willing to risk his life for them. Moreover, she also didn't understand what the Evil Edge sword competition had to do with Nye Tian saving someone. Nye Tian didn't hide anything and told her about Elder Sword. Third Lady Gong Sun was stunned and only reacted after a long while. She said, "Nye Tian, if you had known me earlier, perhaps I could have begged Father to get Lord Jianglai to hand over the ink Jade Dragon Sword that imprisons Lord Jian Qingqi's soul." "Auntie, it's not that simple." Nye Tian shook his head with a bitter smile. "How could Sword Master Gongsun offend Jianglai for me when he doesn't know me at all? He's the leader of the Xingtian Alliance. I'll beg Father. He'll definitely agree," Third Lady Gongsun insisted. However, Nye Tian shook his head again and said, "Although Sword Master Gongsun is Annie's father, he represents the divine martial sword pagoda. If he asks Jianglai to hand over the ink Jade Dragon Sword without any reason, how can he not be suspicious? Sword Master Gongsun has to consider the divine martial sword pagoda in everything he does, so he won't easily clash with Jianglai. Third Lady Gongsun looked at Nie Tian in shock. She didn't expect him to be so thorough at such a young age. Third Lady Gongsun thought for a moment and continued asking, Nie Tian, even if you become the sword champion of the Evil Edge sword duel, will Father offend Jianglai for you? Perhaps, Nie Tian said with a faint smile. The Evil Edge sword duel is a way for me to prove myself. I believe that as long as I'm strong enough and Sword Master Gongsun sees enough potential in me, he'll negotiate with Jianglai for me. You've already proven yourself. Third Lady Gongsun was stunned as she looked at Nie Tian in shock. Back at the Shura sword duel, Gongsun Sheng had seen Nie Tian's freakish strength and had been shocked multiple times. That's not enough, Nie Tian said with a faint smile. I'll show even more of myself at the Evil Edge sword duel. Also, I'll join the Divine Martial Sword Pagoda after that. I'll bring up my request to Sword Master Gongsun, and I believe he'll agree. Third Lady Gongsun looked at Nie Tian in shock, her eyes filled with disbelief. To her, Nie Tian was already freakishly strong at the Shura sword duel, but he was going to be even stronger at the Evil Edge sword duel. Didn't that mean that Nie Tian didn't go all out at the Shura sword duel and was conserving his strength? Chapter 1951. Third Lady Gongsun looked at Nie Tian for a long time before calming down. She said with a worried expression, Nie Tian, although the Evil Edge sword duel is held in the Divine Martial Sword Pagoda, it has become a grand gathering of swordsmen in the 9 domains after nearly 1,000,000 years of development. During the Evil Edge sword duel, all the sword geniuses in the 9 domains will participate. At that time, you will be competing with the most monstrous swordsmen in the 9 domains. It won't be easy for you to become the sword chief. And don't worry, I have confidence. Nie Tian smiled faintly, the corner of his mouth brimming with confidence. He knew that the Evil Edge sword duel was incomparable to the Shura sword field, but he still had 3 months. In these 3 months, he would make the best use of his time to cultivate and strive to improve his strength again. However, this was an extremely difficult task. After all, Nie Tian had just improved his strength, and he was now at the bottleneck between a high god and an overgod. Therefore, it would be extremely difficult to achieve a breakthrough within 3 months. Nie Tian, I believe in you. Third Lady Gongsun could feel the strong confidence released from Nie Tian. She couldn't help but nod and said in a heavy tone. Then the two talked for a while. Third Lady Gongsun warned Nie Tian about some things before leaving. Not long after Third Lady Gongsun left, Guiwu Quang Sha returned. Nie Tian, what did Third Lady Gongsun say to you? Guiwu Quang Sha couldn't help but ask when he saw Nie Tian's strange expression. Lord Guiwu, I promised my aunt that I wouldn't leak our conversation to anyone else. Nie Tian faintly smiled and said with a helpless expression. Guiwu Quang Sha curled his lips and didn't ask anymore. For the next 3 months, Nie Tian planned to temporarily stay in the governor's mansion. It was relatively safer here. No matter how arrogant Xian Zongfeng was, he wouldn't dare to make a move against Nie Tian in the governor's mansion. Nie Tian told Guiwu Quang Sha that he would be training hard for the next 3 months and asked the latter to guard him. Guiwu Quang Sha would naturally not reject, and nodded his head in agreement to Nie Tian. When Nie Tian returned to his room, he took out the 9 extremities and entered it. 3 months was neither a long time nor a short time. Nie Tian possessed the primal chaos origin coffin, so 3 months was equivalent to more than 2 years to him. I should be able to break through to Overgod after cultivating arduously for over 2 years, Nie Tian murmured before sitting down and sending the senses of his soul into the chaotic origin coffin. He first checked on the 9 extreme chaos beast condition. The latter was still absorbing the power of chaos continuously. Nie Tian was very curious. He did not know how long the 9 extreme chaos beast condition would last. He also did not know what kind of changes would occur after the 9 extreme chaos beast absorbed enough chaos power. During the Evil Edge sword meet, Nie Tian's greatest trump card was the 9th extreme chaos beast. He also hoped that the 9th extreme chaos beast could absorb more chaos power so that it could unleash more power. Following that, Nyetian did not think too much. Instead, he quickly entered into a state of cultivation. First, Nyetian began to check on his own sword intent. At that moment, there were 5 types of sword intent in his body: the proud sword intent, the star sword intent, the thunderbolt sword intent, the soul-devouring sword intent, and the 3 evils sword intent. It was extremely unusual for a swordsman to have 5 types of sword intent in his body, especially when Nyetian's 5 types of sword intent were all extremely terrifying. Given Nyetian's current sword Dao realm, he could perfectly fuse the 5 types of sword intent together and unleash an even greater power with one sword. At that moment, Nyetian began to release the power of Godfiend. Then he slowly released the sword intent in his body, allowing the sword intent to fuse with the power of Godfiend. The power of Godfiend had devoured the blood-weeping sword infant and had a very strong ability to enhance the sword intent. Under the activation of the power of Godfiend, the sword intent moved slowly. Like a gurgling stream, it flowed within Nyetian's body. However, at that moment, Nyetian suddenly sensed something. His expression changed involuntarily, and he almost screamed. He suddenly realized that within the power of Godfiend, there was actually a very strange sword intent aura. This was a brand new sword intent aura that Nyetian had never felt before. How is this possible? Nyetian was stunned for a moment. Then he reacted and said in shock, the 5 types of sword intent fused within the power of Godfiend and actually gave birth to a brand new sword intent. That's right, this was indeed a brand new sword intent aura. Previously, Nyetian could also fuse the 5 types of sword intent together, but that fusion was only on the surface. It was not a true fusion. But now, under the effect of the power of Godfiend, the 5 types of sword intent had truly fused together and formed a brand new sword intent. What a terrifying sword intent aura. Feeling the new sword intent aura, Nyetian's expression changed involuntarily, and he could not help but exclaim. The new sword intent perfectly inherited the attributes of the 5 types of sword intent. The violence of the proud sword intent, the vastness of the star's sword intent, the agitation of the thunderbolt sword intent, the spirit-devouring of the soul-devouring sword intent, and the evilness of the 3 evils sword intent. The attributes of the 5 types of sword intent were perfectly fused together, fused into one, and stimulated each other, forming an extremely terrifying sword intent. Nyetian, what's going on? At this moment, the figure of Fat Cat appeared and looked at Nyetian with a horrified expression, obviously also sensing that something was wrong. Fat, I inadvertently created a new sword intent. Nyetian exclaimed, ecstatic. As he spoke, he tried to release the new sword intent. Feeling the sword intent released by Nyetian, Fat Cat's expression changed involuntarily, and he was quite surprised. He said, I have seen countless types of sword intent, but the sword intent that you are releasing now is unprecedentedly terrifying. If you are a swordsman of the same level, your sword intent is definitely the strongest. The strongest? Nyetian exclaimed excitedly. It was really not easy for Fat Cat to say that the strongest was the strongest. Who was Fat Cat? He was a 9-tailed chinchilla, and his body had inherited endless memories of chinchilla. The number of swordsmen he had seen was absolutely unimaginable. When he said that Nyetian's sword intent was the strongest, it was not only referring to the 9 domains, but also those swordsmen at the sage level. Nyetian, try to control this sword intent. Fat Cat calmed down and said to Nyetian. Nyetian nodded, and with a thought, the sword intent around his body surged and wrapped around his body, forming a sword intent shield. Nyetian laughed and said proudly, Fat, this sword intent is very easy to control, as if I condensed it myself. That is indeed the case. Fat Cat nodded and said, This new sword intent is indeed terrifying, but it can only be used in conjunction with the power of the demon god. Nyetian also noticed this and couldn't help but nod, saying, I don't have much power of the demon god now. This sword intent can be used as my final killing move, and it will definitely be able to burst out with unimaginable power. Fat Cat nodded and said with a smile, since this sword intent is produced by the power of the demon god, why not call it the demon god sword intent? Chapter 1952. Sword intent of the demonic god. Nyetian murmured gently. He struggled to hide his excitement. He could sense that the sword intent of the demonic god was extremely powerful. It was even more powerful than when he fused 5 sword intents. More importantly, the sword intent of the demonic god consumed the power of the demonic god instead of his mental strength. Nyetian rarely fused multiple sword intents in battle, as it would consume a lot of mental strength. He would not be able to concentrate. Victory was often decided in a single moment in a battle between experts. A moment of distraction could mean life or death. However, it was all fine now. Nyetian possessed the sword intent of the demonic god, allowing him to erupt with the most terrifying strike at the most crucial moment. A while later, Nyetian became cold and began to cultivate. 3 months passed in the blink of an eye. Nyetian emerged from the 9 extremities once again. His presence had become much more powerful, and sharp sword intent surged through his body. It was extremely sharp. There were still 3 days until the Evil Peak sword competition began. Nyetian ended his cultivation 3 days early so that he could familiarize himself with the competition. However, Nyetian's expression was rather ugly when he walked out of the room. It was even rather ugly. He murmured, I still haven't broken through after 3 months of cultivation. After 3 months of hard work, Nyetian's strength had indeed improved. His aura had grown much stronger, and his control over his sword intent had become much more proficient. However, he still hadn't broken through to the Lord stage. He was still at the peak Greater God stage. He could not help but feel rather gloomy. It seemed that becoming an overgod was even more difficult than he had imagined. Nyetian, becoming an overgod requires comprehending the laws of overgods. It's much more difficult than you can imagine. At this moment, the fat cat appeared. She sniggered with a smile. You should know that many cultivators have to enter secluded cultivation for centuries or even millennia in order to break through to overgod. You've only cultivated for 3 months. That's nothing. Sigh. Nyetian sighed gently and said, I'm just afraid that I'll come across a powerful opponent in the Evil Peak sword competition this time. I'm still too weak right now. I probably won't be able to become the sword chief with my current strength. Let's wait and see. The fat cat laughed and said, if it really doesn't work, I still have a last resort prepared for you. What is it? Nyetian couldn't help but ask. I can't tell you now. Fat cat smiled mysteriously, not telling Nyetian. Nyetian smiled. He didn't know what Fat Cat was trying to do, but he didn't think too much about it. Nyetian, your training is over. Within the small courtyard, Guiwu Kwangsha saw Nyetian come out and sensed that the latter's aura had become much stronger, so he laughed in a clear voice. Nyetian nodded and thanked him. Thank you for your hard work, Master Guiwu. Having a peak paramount god guard one's seclusion wasn't something that just anyone could enjoy. Master Guiwu, how's the Evil Peak sword competition going? Let's go and have a look. Nyetian didn't waste any time and said directly. Okay. Guiwu Kwangsha nodded and then walked out of the small courtyard with Nyetian. During the time that Nyetian was in seclusion, Guiwu Kwangsha guarded the small courtyard closely. He didn't know how the preparation for the Evil Peak sword competition was going. The two walked out of the small courtyard and saw Lien Wui and Sakura in the distance. Sakura. Nyetian's eyes flickered. He was just worried about Sakura, and the latter's appearance was just in time. Lien Wui and Sakura walked over. The two looked like a pair of brother and sister, and their behavior was very intimate. Nyetian's divine sense sensed Sakura's body and confirmed that the latter's body didn't have the aura of the blood-weeping sword infant. However, he could feel that the aura of the blood-weeping sword infant in Lien Wui's body was getting stronger and more violent, as if it could lose control at any time. After devouring the blood-weeping sword infant, Nyetian's perception of the blood-weeping sword infant became very sensitive. He felt that if he didn't find a way to suppress the blood-weeping sword infant, Lien Wui would be in danger. Fat Cat also sensed that something was wrong and sighed, but didn't say anything. Nietian, the Evil Peak sword competition is about to begin. Let's go to the Evil Peak Sea to have a look. Lien Wui was completely unaware of the danger she was in and said to Nietian with an excited face. Okay. Nietian nodded and smiled. He also wanted to go to the Evil Peak Sea to have a look. In any case, with Guiwu Guangsha by his side, his safety shouldn't be a problem. On the way, Lien Wui suddenly said to Nietian, Nietian, little brother Sakura doesn't want to participate in the Evil Peak sword competition. Please persuade him. Nietian laughed and said, whether or not he wants to participate in the Evil Peak sword competition is Sakura's own business. I can't say much. With Sakura's identity and temperament, how could he be interested in the Evil Peak sword competition? To him, participating in the Evil Peak sword competition was too degrading. This was because he was the one who created the divine martial sword pagoda. As Nietian spoke, he couldn't help but look at Sakura. Sakura's appearance had changed over the past few months. He had grown a lot taller, and his aura had become much stronger. Kids grow really fast. Nietian's lips curled up, and he couldn't help but sigh in his heart. However, he could only sigh in his heart. If Sakura heard this, the latter would probably be angry. A moment later, Nietian and the others appeared in the sea of Evil Peak. So many viewing platforms. Nietian looked at the sea of Evil Peak and couldn't help but frown and smile. At the moment, there were many large stone platforms floating in the air above the sea of Evil Peak. Each platform was 1,000 meters wide and was protected by a sword formation. It was obviously a place to watch the battles. In the center of the spectator stand, there were many stone pillars that towered into the sky. They were like sharp swords that stood on the surface of the sea. Nietian noticed that the stone pillars were in pairs. This was probably where the swordsmen would fight. Many of the swordsmen participating in the Evil Peak sword competition were paramount gods. Ordinary arenas couldn't allow them to fight, so they used this simple and direct method. At this moment, there were many swordsmen gathered on the sea of Evil Peak. Most of them looked very young, so they were probably participating in the competition. The Evil Peak sword competition only allowed swordsmen under 30,000 years old to participate, which was very young for a godly state warrior. Nietian, did you know that the Evil Peak sword competition this time has alarmed the 9 major realms? I heard that almost all the geniuses of the sword doctrine are here. Even many hidden sword sects have sent swordsmen to participate. I really want to see what those hidden sword sect swordsmen are like. Lien Wui stood next to Nietian and said with excitement on her face. Nietian smiled faintly and didn't say anything, but there was a hint of worry in his eyes. The Evil Peak sword competition was suddenly brought forward, which caused a great sensation in the 9 major realms. And there was a name in the 9 major realms. Nietian. Chapter 1953. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that many people had come for Nietian. They wanted to see if the person who had forced the divine martial sword pagoda to bring forward the evil edge sword competition had 3 heads and 6 arms. Nietian scanned the crowd with his divine sense. Most of them were overgods. Only a few were early paramount gods. Looks like the real experts haven't shown up yet, Nietian said to himself with a faint smile. The evil edge sword competition had attracted all the geniuses of the sword in the 9 realms. It would be too disappointing if there were only these people. Nietian looked around and familiarized himself with the venue. He didn't stay any longer and prepared to leave. Nietian. However, right at this moment, a voice rang out, and a figure appeared not far away from Nietian. His eyes were fixed on Nietian in an extremely domineering manner. Zhuo Bufan. Nietian looked in the direction of the voice and saw a familiar face. It was Zhuo Bufan, one of the 3 great geniuses of the sword in the divine martial sword pagoda. Although Nietian knew Zhuo Bufan, he hadn't spoken to him much. He didn't know why the latter was suddenly looking for him. Zhuo Bufan, what are you doing? Lien Wui frowned when she saw Zhuo Bufan's expression. Zhuo Bufan glanced at Lien Wui, but didn't say anything. He looked at Nietian and said, Nietian, I heard you passed the Azure sword field. You used it to force the two sword masters to agree to bring forward the evil edge sword competition. I really want to see just how strong you are. Nietion's eyes narrowed slightly, and then he laughed and said, "Je bouffon, did you show up in such a threatening manner just to say this to me? Je bouffon, are you crazy?" Nietion's reaction was very calm, but Lien Wui became anxious and scolded. "Nietion once saved your life. Is this how you repay him?" When the three vicious beasts of the North Sea appeared that day, Zhuo Bufan almost died at the hands of Yonglin. It was Nietion who intervened and saved his life. But at that time, Zhuo Bufan was already unconscious, so he obviously didn't remember these things. Moreover, Zhuo Bufan had never seen Nietion fight, so he was very skeptical of the latter's strength. "Junior sister, I'm challenging him on behalf of the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. Even if he saved my life, I can't let him challenge the Shenwu Sword Pagoda," Zhuo Bufan said loudly. Lien Wui didn't give him any face and said directly, "Zhuo Bufan, you are too arrogant. Your strength is below mine. Even if you want to challenge Nietion, it should be me who chooses. Since when is it your turn?" "Junior sister, you..." Zhuo Bufan choked on Lien Wui's words. His face turned red, and he couldn't speak. Nietion was very calm. He looked Zhuo Bufan up and down, then smiled and said, "Zhuo Bufan, so you've become a paramount god. No wonder you dare to challenge me like this." Zhuo Bufan used to be a peak-over god, but now he was an early paramount god. His battle prowess had increased qualitatively, which was why he dared to challenge Nietion. But he didn't know that Nietion had once killed a mid-stage paramount god. "Nietion, I will also participate in the Evil Edge sword competition. I look forward to fighting you," Zhuo Bufan said cold. He glanced at Lien Wui, then turned and left. Nietion looked at Zhuo Bufan's back and couldn't help but smile bitterly. With his current strength, he could completely disregard Zhuo Bufan. He had killed Black Wind in the Azura sword field, and the latter was far stronger than Zhuo Bufan. The fact that Zhuo Bufan dared to challenge Nietion meant that he didn't understand Nietion's strength at all. Zhuo Bufan is such an idiot. He really is an ingrate who returns kindness with enmity. Lien Wui said angrily, pouting, "You can't blame him. Maybe he thinks I'm provoking and insulting the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. That's why he's so hostile." Nietion smiled and turned to leave. But at that moment, there were many people around him, and a large number of them were approaching him. Everyone was staring at Nietion as if he were a monster, and they were talking about him without any scruples. "Is that kid Nietion? Am I seeing things? How can he be a piece of trash with only the strength of a superior god? I heard that Nietion is a silver-haired swordsman. That kid also has silver hair. Could he have deliberately painted his hair to impersonate Nietion? I don't think so. That guy just now is Zhuo Bufan. I heard that he's a genius from the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. He couldn't have mistaken him for someone else. Lord Nietion is the one who forced the two sword masters of the Shenwu Sword Pagoda to admit defeat. I don't believe that kid is Lord Nietion." Everyone was talking about it, and they looked at Nietion with undisguised suspicion. "You idiots, he is Nietion, the one who brought forward the Evil Edge sword competition." Lien Wui couldn't take it anymore. She suddenly stood up and shouted. Nietion glanced at Lien Wui and was speechless. Wasn't this girl trying to make trouble for him? Nietion didn't care what these people thought. He didn't want any trouble and just wanted to leave as soon as possible. However, Lien Wui's words would probably infuriate many people. "Brat, I don't care if you're Nietion or not. I'll fight you today. Let's see what you've got." As expected, as soon as Lien Wui finished speaking, a burly swordsman jumped out and pointed at Nietion with an arrogant look on his face. The swordsman was a peak-over god. Why would he take Nietion, a greater god, seriously? Piss off. Nietion could not be bothered to talk to the person. He directly bellowed out as his eyes were cold. The burly swordsman was stunned. Afterwards, he could not help but shiver. He was shocked as he thought to himself, "How is this possible? I'm a peak-over god. So why do I feel like I've fallen into an ice house from his glare? It must be a mistake." Clearly, the burly swordsman did not know that Nietion had just used a mental attack as a warning. If he still dared to act arrogantly, he could not blame Nietian. Let's go. Nietian did not want to waste any more time. He smiled faintly and turned around to leave. Brat, how dare you ignore me? You're looking to die. However, at this moment, the burly swordsman returned to his senses. He roared out furiously and actually took a step forward, directly attacking Nietian from behind. He stabbed out with his sword, and sword intent surged. With powerful killing intent, he surged towards Nietian. Chapter 1954. Everything happened in the blink of an eye. When the crowd realized what had happened, they all gasped and stared at Lien Wui in shock. Many people didn't think that the seemingly harmless Lien Wui would be so powerful. With a casual swing of her sword, she sent the burly swordsman flying. The burly swordsman suddenly steadied himself, and his expression was extremely ugly. He didn't think that he would be defeated by a little girl. Nietian didn't even turn around. He only shook his head and walked away. Brat, hiding behind a woman, what kind of ability is that? If you're still a man, then fight me. Who would have thought that the burly swordsman wouldn't give up and roared wildly? He was defeated by Lien Wui and lost a lot of face. Therefore, he wanted to defeat Nietian to prove himself. Nietian's eyes narrowed and his body froze. He slowly turned around and stared at the burly swordsman. He said coldly, "You should be glad that I wasn't the one who attacked just now. Otherwise, you would be a corpse now." Nietian's cold eyes were filled with murderous intent that enveloped the burly swordsman. The burly swordsman's face was as white as a sheet of paper. Suddenly, he felt a heat in his chest, and the smell of urine permeated the air. One look, just one look, and the burly swordsman wet his pants. Nietian was right. The burly swordsman should thank Lien Wui for saving his life. If Lien Wui didn't attack and Nietian attacked instead, the burly swordsman wouldn't have survived. Lien Wui was too innocent and didn't dare to kill anyone. Nietian was a ruthless person to begin with. There was a strong sense of oppression in his eyes. On top of that, he used his mental energy. How could the burly swordsman resist? Now, do you still want to fight me? Nietian stared at the burly swordsman and spoke coldly. No, I don't dare. The burly swordsman reacted. His teeth were chattering and his body was trembling as if he could no longer stand. Nietian sneered, his face full of disdain. He hated this kind of people who bullied the weak and feared the strong the most. Just because they had a little bit of strength, they didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. Did they really think they were some kind of green onion or garlic? At this moment, the crowd came to their senses and their faces were filled with shock. Am I seeing things? The kid just glared at that person, and he actually made a peek over God piss his pants? Could this silver-haired kid really be Lord Nietian? How could it be fake? If it weren't for Sir Nietian, how could he have scared a peek over God to such a state? Now, everyone finally believed that Nietian was the one who had forced the Shinwu Sword Pagoda to bring forward the Evil Edge sword competition. I told you a long time ago that he's Nietian, but you were too stupid to listen. Lien Wui had a triumphant smile on her face, and she raised her chin high like a proud swan. Nietian glanced at Lien Wui and could not help but smile bitterly. She really was a little girl. Sakura had been with Lien Wui for so many days. It had really been hard on him. Nietian, is it? Before Lien Wui had even finished speaking, a sneer rang out in the air. It was extremely cold, and it was filled with undisguised disdain. Everyone was stunned when they heard the voice. They looked over and saw a black-clothed man standing in the air. His face was sunken as he stared at Nietian coldly. The person seemed very young. His facial features were firm and chiseled, and he seemed valiant. Violent sword intent surged around him, making him seem extremely sharp. The crowd could not help but discuss when they saw the black-clothed man. Who is this person? He's so arrogant to look down on Sir Nietian. Is he tired of living? I think he's just looking for a beating. He looks like he needs a beating. Looks like the lesson from the peak over God's swordsman wasn't enough. This guy wants to experience Sir Nietian's power as well. The crowd spoke up one after another. This time, they all sided with Nietian, and their tone was extremely respectful. The reason why the competition of the evil edge had been brought forward was all thanks to Nietian. As a result, his name had already become a legend, and he seemed to possess a dignified aura that could not be offended. "Who are you?" Before Nietian could say anything, Lien Wui spoke up first. She looked at the black-clothed man angrily. However, the black-clothed man completely ignored Lien Wui. He stared fixedly at Nietian and seemed rather doubtful. He said, "You're only a high god. Are you really as powerful as the rumors say? What do you think?" Nie Tianling smiled coldly. His face was also extremely sunken. The black-clothed man had clearly come to cause trouble, so there was no need for Nie Tian to be polite with him. "Of course I'll only know if it's true or not." The black-clothed man smiled strangely. Afterwards, his eyes darkened, and he said proudly, "Nie Tian, do you dare to receive a strike from me?" Nie Tian was stunned. This person was just too arrogant to provoke him like this. "Bastard, if you want to fight with Nie Tian, you'll have to get past me first." Lien Wui was immediately infuriated after being ignored. She roared out and actually leapt forward. Her sword whistled through the air as a blur shot towards the black-clothed man. The black-clothed man stood in the air. He did not even glance at Lien Wui's attack. His body only trembled, and a strand of sword intent suddenly shot out. It was extremely sharp and extremely fast, like a blade that could cut through the world. In the next moment, the two blurs collided in the air, and something strange happened. Whoosh! Lien Wui's blur was directly sliced in half by the black-clothed man's blur. Moreover, the blur did not shatter. This extremely strange scene caused everyone's expression to freeze. Their faces were full of shock. Nobody thought that they would see something like this. When two blurs collided, if one of the blurs was stronger, the weaker blur would be destroyed. How could the blur be sliced in half? What a sharp sword intent! Seeing this, Nie Tian couldn't help but frown, and his expression changed drastically. The reason why the black-clothed man's blur was able to slice through Lien Wui's blur was because his sword intent was too sharp and too fast. Lien Wui's expression changed drastically when she saw the scene before her. She screamed out in fear, "Watch out!" At the same time, a young yet hurried voice rang out. Then, a sword pierced through the air and blocked the fatal strike for Lien Wui. Nie Tian's eyes widened. When he saw who it was, he sighed in relief. The person who saved Lien Wui at the critical moment was none other than Di Tian. "Lien Wui, are you all right?" Di Tian came to Lien Wui's side. He was extremely nervous. "Brother Di Tian, I'm fine." Lien Wui's forehead was covered in sweat, and she was still in shock. The black-clothed man was stunned when he saw Di Tian casually block his attack. Then, he saw Di Tian's face, and his expression changed. He asked in surprise, "Who are you?" The black-clothed man clearly didn't expect that a 6- or 7-year-old child would be able to block his attack. Chapter 1955. Sakura Heaven. Nie Tian sensed Sakura Heaven's killing intent and quickly moved to stop him, signaling for him to calm down. Nie Tian turned to look at Sakura Heaven and couldn't help but feel a little strange. He had rarely seen Sakura Heaven act so impulsively. It seemed that the black-robed man had almost injured Lien Wui, which made Sakura Heaven very angry. The black-robed man's strength was very strange, and he had almost killed Lien Wui with a single strike. But Nie Tian knew that Sakura Heaven's battle prowess wasn't just for show. No matter how strong the black-robed man was, there was no way he could be Sakura Heaven's match. If Sakura Heaven really made a move, the black-robed man would be dead for sure. Nie Tian had a feeling that this black-robed man wasn't simple, so he didn't ask Sakura Heaven to make a move. Sakura Heaven looked at Nie Tian, and the killing intent in his eyes receded a little. He turned and retreated behind Lien Wui, not saying a word. Nie Tian's brows were furrowed, and his heart was filled with confusion. He could tell that the black-robed man was an early-stage paramount god, and his sword Dao was at the elementary level of sword martial unity. He was indeed very powerful, but he definitely wasn't powerful enough to insta-kill Lien Wui. Lien Wui was the #1 monster in the divine martial sword pagoda, and there was no doubt that her sword Dao was strong. What made Nie Tian even more confused was that the black-robed man's sword intent was too sharp and fast, almost to the point of inconceivably fast. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to cut through Lien Wui's sword shadow. It was Nie Tian's first time encountering such a sharp sword intent. At this moment, everyone's eyes were blank because the scene that had just happened was completely beyond their understanding. Lien Wui's strength was shocking enough, but the black-robed man was clearly even more terrifying. And the strangest person was undoubtedly Sakura Heaven. How could a 6-year-old child not be terrifying when he unleashed the power of a single sword strike that could shake heaven and earth? The black-robed man looked at Sakura Heaven in confusion, and it took him a long time to calm down. Then he locked his gaze on Nie Tian and said in a cold voice, "Nie Tian, do you dare to take a sword strike from me?" It seemed that he was very persistent. The purpose of his appearance this time was to fight with Nie Tian. So arrogant. Nie Tian laughed and said in a deep voice, "Since you're so interested, how can I let you down?" As he spoke, Nie Tian took a step forward, and his entire body surged with sword will. He was ready for battle. Since the other party was using such a method to provoke him in front of everyone, how could not fight back? Very good. The man in black snickered and shouted, "I'd like to see how you can make the Shenwu sword pagoda give in." As soon as he finished speaking, the man in black released an extremely terrifying sword intent. The aura of his entire body was actually much stronger than before. He hadn't used his full strength when he was fighting Lien Wui just now. Nie Tian, his sword intent is very fast. You have to be careful. Sakura transmitted his voice to Nie Tian and reminded him. "I know," Nie Tian replied. Then he sucked in a deep breath. Terrifying black runes gushed out of his body, and his aura crazily rose. Seeing this, the man in black's expression changed. He exclaimed, "Nie Tian, you sure have some tricks up your sleeve." Though surprised by Nie Tian's sudden increase in chi, the man in black wasn't afraid at all. Instead, he swung his sword, and an infinite amount of sword will surged in the air. In an instant, a horrifying shadow of a sword appeared. Like a small waterfall, it pressed down on Nie Tian. In an instant, the space tightened as if it was being pulled by an invisible force. It was so tight that it could break at any moment. This was a phenomenon caused by the extreme speed of sword will. It was enough to prove how terrifying the man in black sword will was. Burning sea of stars. Seeing this, Nie Tian didn't retreat. Instead, he swung his sword. The shadow of the sword appeared, and it was burning with flames. It was extremely terrifying. In midair, the two shadows of the sword collided with each other. The space suddenly shook. Suddenly, a horrifying wave of air exploded and filled the space. This time, the man in black sword shadow didn't tear apart Nie Tian's sword shadow. Instead, it was blocked. However, Nie Tian was obviously still suppressed. His body was withstanding the violent wave of sword will, and he was forced to retreat. Luckily, his martial body was very strong, and he could withstand the impact of the sword will. Nie Tian steadied himself and looked at the man in black with a gloomy expression. After exchanging blows with this man, he could feel the sharpness and horror of his opponent's sword will. Nie Tian used a very clumsy method. He tried to release as much sword will as possible and used the vast sword will to block the sharpness of the sword will. Though he blocked the man in black sword, he consumed a lot of sword will. Nie Tian couldn't understand why the man in black sword will could be so sharp and so fast. "Did you block it?" The black-robed man looked at Nie Tian with an extremely grim expression. At the same time, a playful smile appeared on his face as he said coldly, "Nie Tian, you really didn't disappoint me. You really blocked my sword strike. Now, you're qualified to fight with me." The man in black was really arrogant. Nie Tian had blocked his sword, but he thought that Nie Tian was just barely qualified to fight with him. The man in black's arrogance immediately caused a discussion among the crowd. Who the hell is this guy? He's so arrogant. But speaking of which, this person is really strong. He was able to beat back Lord Nyetian with one sword. Bulsh asterisk T. Lord Nyetian is someone who forced the divine martial sword master to bow his head through the Shura sword field. Lord Nyetian definitely didn't use his full strength in that exchange just now. Otherwise, that kid in black would be a corpse. The crowd discussed loudly and didn't avoid the man in black at all. The black-robed man didn't pay attention to the discussions around him. Instead, he looked at Nyetian and said, "Nyetian, I look forward to our duel in the Evil Edge sword competition." After saying that, the man in black moved like a sword shadow and disappeared. Just the qualification to fight. Nyetian looked in the direction the man in black disappeared and couldn't help but smile bitterly. He murmured, "Looks like you don't think I'm even qualified to be your opponent." The Evil Edge Sword Conference is getting more and more interesting. First it was Joie Bouffon, and now it was this black-clothed swordsman. The Evil Edge Sword Conference hadn't started yet, but there were already so many people staring at Nyetian. He would probably become the target of public criticism when the conference started. This wasn't strange. Nyetian was famous and had stolen the limelight from all the geniuses. These geniuses didn't like to see Nyetian in the limelight because Nyetian was an obstacle to their limelight. Who didn't want to be the focus of the Sword Conference in the 9 Major Realms Sword Conference? Unfortunately, Nyetian was the one who brought forward the Evil Edge Sword Conference. This was the biggest limelight, so he became the target that other geniuses wanted to defeat the most. At this time, Wild Sand came to Nyetian's side with a strange expression. He frowned and said in a low voice, "I didn't expect the Xianyuan family's swordsman to also appear." Xianyuan family? Nyetian was stunned. He looked at Wild Sand and asked, "Lord Gui Wu, do you know the identity of that black-clothed swordsman?" Chapter 1956. Someone from the Xianyuan family? Nyetian couldn't help but be stunned when he heard Gui Wu Violent Sand's words. He had never heard of the Xianyuan family. He couldn't help but ask, "Are they very powerful?" The Xianyuan family is an extremely terrifying existence among the 9 great families of creation. However, this family has been living in seclusion for hundreds of thousands of years. I didn't expect that even the Xianyuan family would be alarmed by this Evil Edge sword meet. Gui Wu Violent Sand's eyes flickered. He was obviously very shocked. The Xianyuan family is also one of the 9 great families of creation. Nyetian was stunned once again. He couldn't help but be somewhat puzzled. Nyetian still didn't know about the 9 great families of creation. "Nyetian, there are too many people here. Let's go somewhere else to talk." Gui Wu Violent Sand's gaze swept across everyone as he said to Nyetian. Nyetian agreed. He immediately left the Evil Edge Sea with Gui Wu Violent Sand and arrived at a secluded place on Evil Edge Island. "Nyetian, how much do you know about the 9 great families of creation?" Gui Wu Violent Sand asked without waiting for Nyetian to speak. Nyetian thought for a moment and said, "Of the 9 great families, I currently know of the Nye family, Chiwu family, Gui Wu family, Jin family, Jiang family, Yu family, Zhou family, and the Xianyuan family. That's 8 families. I don't know about the last one." Gui Wu Violent Sand nodded slightly and said with a smile, "You already know a lot. There's no one in the 9 great domains who doesn't know about the 9 great families of creation. However, there aren't many people who can truly name the 9 great families. Among the 9 great families, there are a few families that have disappeared for a long time. The Chiwu family disappeared a long time ago. After that, the Xianyuan family and the Nangong family also lived in seclusion. Currently, there are only 6 great families that are still active in the 9 great domains. Nangong family. Nyetian secretly remembered this family and waited for Gui Wu Violent Sand to continue. Gui Wu Violent Sand paused for a moment before continuing. Among the 9 great families, the Nye family and the Chiwu family were originally the strongest and were known as the 2 strongest families. The Xianyuan family and the Nangong family were slightly inferior to the 2 strongest families, but they were equally powerful. The Jiang family's strength was above the other 4 families. But later, the Chiwu family, Xianyuan family, and Nangong family disappeared one after another. The Chiwu family was forced to the netherworld demonic realm, and the Xianyuan family and Nangong family lived in seclusion, becoming hidden families. I really didn't expect that the Xianyuan family and the Jiang family to appear again after being isolated for hundreds of thousands of years. I truly didn't expect that the Xianyuan family, which has been in seclusion for hundreds of thousands of years, would actually reappear. Nie Tian's reaction was very calm, but he suddenly thought of something and asked, Lord Gui Wu, since the Xianyuan family has been in seclusion for hundreds of thousands of years, how do you know that the black-clothed man is from the Xianyuan family? Gui Wu Kuangsha faintly smiled and said, The sword intent of the swordsman of the Xianyuan family has a special characteristic, and that is its sharpness. Gua sword from the Tian Tian of sword from sharp, the sharp, I Xiantes masters Tiat. As he spoke, Gui Wu Kuangsha looked at Sakura, who was at the side, and said, If Lord Sakura wasn't a legendary swordsman, I'm afraid that he might not be a match for that black-clothed man. Yes, that is indeed the case. Sakura was not angry. Instead, he nodded and said, Although that person is only at the primary realm of sword and martial unity, the strength of his sword intent is comparable to that of an advanced sword and martial unity. I have never seen a swordsman with such a sharp sword intent. I see. When Yetian heard Sakura's words, his eyes slightly narrowed. To be able to get such a high evaluation from the latter, it was enough to show the black-clothed man's strength. Nyetian thought for a moment and said, Since that black-clothed man is from the Xianyuan family, then there must be a hidden expert behind him. Faintly nodding his head, Gui Wu Kuangsha replied, That black-clothed male should be a genius swordsman of the Xianyuan family. The Xianyuan family wouldn't have sent him alone. And yet Tian secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Fortunately, he stopped Sakura in time just now. Otherwise, if that black-clothed man was really injured, it would probably attract the swordsman of Xianyuan family. I understand. Just at this time, the fat cat's strange cry suddenly rang in Yetian's divine sense. The latter seemed to have discovered something and was very excited. Fat, are you all right? Seeing Fat Cat's reaction, Nyetian stared blankly for a moment and couldn't help but ask, Nyetian, I've finally figured it out. Ha ha ha. Fat Cat was close to going crazy and was extremely excited. Nyetian, however, had a stunned look on his face. He wondered in his heart, could it be that Fat found a way to suppress the blood-weeping sword infant? Fat Cat laughed for a long time before finally regaining his calm and said, Nyetian, the reason why that black-clothed swordsman's sword intent is so sharp is because he has the wind origin energy in his body, the extreme of storm. Nyetian stared blankly once again. His face was lifeless, and he was quite surprised. Fat, are you sure that person has the wind origin energy in his body? After a moment, Nyetian finally calmed down, but he still couldn't help but ask again. Of course. Fat Cat chuckled and said, that person's strength isn't strong, and his sword principle isn't top-notch either. The reason why his sword intent can be so sharp is because he has the wind origin energy in his body, the extreme of storm. This isn't quite possible, right? Nyetian still didn't believe it. He said, didn't you say that the origin energy is a stronger force that ordinary people can't integrate? Indeed, not anyone can integrate the origin energy. However, that person has a very special bloodline power in his body that can help him integrate the wind origin energy. As little Fat Cat spoke, it could not help but furrow its brows. But I still can't tell what's so special about that guy's bloodline. It can actually fuse with origin energy. It's just too strange. Nyetian looked at Fat Cat's expression and couldn't help but narrow his eyes. He really didn't expect to meet a swordsman who integrated the wind origin energy. The origin energy was indeed very frightening. Because Nyetian integrated the earth origin energy and the source of the earth vein, his recovery ability was extremely shocking. As long as it wasn't a fatal injury, he could basically recover in the blink of an eye. The earth origin energy contained a strong life force, while the wind origin represented agility and speed. It was because the man in black had the wind origin energy that his sword intent was so sharp. Fat, You just said that the wind origin energy is the extreme of storm. Did that man integrate the entire extreme of storm? Nyation suddenly thought of something and couldn't help but ask. Of course not. Fat Cat let out a strange cry and said, that guy's strength is still too weak. If it was the entire extreme of storm, he wouldn't be able to withstand it. He only integrated a part of the extreme of storm. Nyation nodded, but the shock in his heart was even greater. Just a part of the extreme of storm was already enough to make a swordsman's sword intent so sharp. If it was the entire extreme of storm, it would be even more terrifying. Nyation, that guy's indeed a difficult opponent. If you meet him, you must be careful. Fat Cat sighed at this moment, as if she was hesitating about something and hadn't made a final decision. Nyation nodded, a faint smile appearing at the corner of his mouth, his eyes brimming with confidence. Chapter 1957. The appearance of the Xianyuan family was indeed out of Nyation's expectation. It was an unexpected trouble. However, he was most worried about Xian Zongfeng and an island. With Xian Zongfeng's personality, he would never let Nyation go. Of course, he would not let Di Shirtian go either. In the Shura sword field, Nyation had killed Enai Lin's people. The latter would never let it go. Nyation estimated that Enai Lin's people would definitely appear in the Evil Edge sword competition. I am determined to win the Evil Edge sword competition. No matter who appears, they can't stop me. Nyation said in a deep voice. His eyes became very sharp. Then, everyone turned around and left. Just as Nyation and the others were about to enter the divine martial city, they felt a slight tremor in the void. An expert is coming. Nyation's eyes narrowed as he looked up into the sky. Several figures in black appeared in his field of vision. One of the faces was very familiar. Jiang Yulong. Jiang Yulong. Nyation was not unfamiliar with this person. When Nyation won the lower deity chief competition in the 12 shrine competition, he met Jiang Yulong in the divine shepherd domain. Later, he had a conflict with Jiang Yulong. At the critical moment, his sixth uncle Niefeiyu appeared and slapped Jiang Yulong half to death. Moreover, Nyation also knew that Jiang Yulong was the son of Xingtian Alliance Master Jiang Lai. Nyation did not expect to see Jiang Yulong again here. The Jiang family. Guiwu Kuang-sha looked at the figures and was stunned. He could not help but frown. These black-clothed martial artists were all from the Jiang family. It seemed that the Jiang family had come to join in the fun of the Evil Peak sword duel this time. Brother Guiwu, long time no see. At this time, the Jiang family arrived. The leader of the group locked his eyes on Guiwu Kuang-sha. He seemed very enthusiastic. Jiang Su, I'm also very surprised that your Jiang family would also send someone to participate in the Evil Edge sword meet. Guiwu Kuang-sha sneered, appearing very cold. He already knew that Jian Qingqi had been imprisoned by the Jiang family's patriarch, Jiang Lai. Naturally, he would not give the Jiang family any face. At this moment, the person who appeared in front of Guiwu Kuang-sha and the others was Jiang Lai's younger brother, Jiang Su. Jiang Su's status in the Jiang family was second only to Jiang Lai. The fact that the Jiang family had sent him here showed how much importance the Jiang family placed on the Evil Edge sword discourse. At this moment, Jiang Yulong discovered Nyation. His expression changed abruptly as he exclaimed, "Stinking brat, it's actually you." Of course, he had heard that the Evil Edge sword duel was brought forward because of a person named Nyation. At that time, he had even doubted whether it was really the Nyation he knew so coincidentally. From the looks of it, that was indeed the case. At this moment, Jiang Yulong could not believe the scene before him. In his opinion, Nyation had always been an ant-like existence. How could he have forced the divine martial sword pagoda to give way? At this moment, when he saw Nyation, Jiang Yulong was indescribably shocked. Just over a year ago, when Jiang Yulong had met Nyation, the latter had only been a lower celestial martialist. He was practically an ant that Jiang Yulong could crush to death at any time. However, Nyation's strength had risen to the peak of upper celestial. This kind of strength advancement speed was too frightening. In just over a year, Jiang Yulong's strength had risen by 2 major realms. If he had not seen it with his own eyes, Jiang Yulong would not have believed it. Jiang Su's eyes narrowed slightly as he scanned Nie Tian with his consciousness. He could not help but ask doubtfully, Yulong, do you know this little brother? Second uncle, this kid is Nie Tian. Jiang Yulong stared coldly at Nie Tian and said fiercely, he is Nie Tian? Jiang Su was taken aback for a moment. Then he smiled and said, so, the legendary Nie Tian is actually an upper celestial martialist. How interesting. Nie Tian smiled faintly. How could he not hear the sarcasm in Jiang Su's words? However, he did not care. Second uncle, don't underestimate him. Jiang Yulong's face was gloomy as he suddenly said, I met him in the Divine Shepherd domain more than a year ago. At that time, he was only a lower celestial. Now, he has already reached the peak of upper celestial. How terrifying. Huh? Jiang Su frowned when he heard Jiang Yulong's words. The way he looked at Nie Tian immediately changed to one of astonishment and even fear. In his opinion, it was simply impossible for someone to improve their strength by 2 major realms in a year. The speed at which Nie Tian's strength improved had shattered Jiang Su's understanding of martial arts. 2 major realms in a year? Is this kid some kind of freak? At this moment, the swordsman behind Jiang Su, who had been silent all this while, spoke up. His face was extremely gloomy, as if he had a deep grudge against Nie Tian. Ninth brother, Jiang Yulong said with a sinister smile. The fact that this kid is improving so quickly means that he must have come across some incredible destiny. He must have acquired some sort of powerful legacy. From what anyone could tell, it would be impossible for someone to improve so quickly unless they had some sort of powerful legacy. So, he got his strength from a legacy. Oomph. The man whom Jiang Yulong referred to as ninth brother chuckled coldly, not bothering to hide his disdain. My name is Jiang Yuji, Nie Tian. I heard that you passed the Sura Sword Arena. Would you mind showing me how strong you are? It was a blatant provocation. Nie Tian looked Jiang Yuji up and down and saw that he was an early paramount god with an elementary level of sword martial unity. Jiang Yuji seemed to be around 20,000 years old, which meant that he was very strong. Ninth brother, there's no need for you to deal with a small fry like him. Before Nie Tian could say anything, Jiang Yulong chuckled coldly, took a step forward, and said, Do you dare to fight me, Nie Tian? You? Nie Tian looked at Jiang Yulong and smiled disdainfully, as though he were looking at an idiot. Ghost warrior Quang Shao watched quietly off to the side, but didn't try to stop Nie Tian. Jiang Su didn't know how strong Nie Tian was, so he didn't try to stop him. Sensing the disdain in Nie Tian's eyes, Jiang Yulong blurted, Are you looking down on me, you brat? Forgive me for being blunt, Jiang Yulong. Nie Tianling said with a cold, arrogant smile. You're too weak. I have no desire to fight you. The last time Nie Tian had seen Jiang Yulong, he had been a peak over god. Now that he was back, he hadn't changed at all. In fact, his aura hadn't even grown stronger. In other words, Jiang Yulong hadn't made any progress in the past year. A peak over god wasn't weak, but compared to Nie Tian, it was nothing. Jiang Yulong's eyes widened. He couldn't believe that Nie Tian dared to look down on him so openly. He flew into a rage and roared. You're too arrogant, Nie Tian. I like to see what right a piece of high god trash like you has to look down on me. Whack! Just as Jiang Yulong was about to go crazy, a sharp beam of sword energy shot through the air and slammed into his face like a steel whip. The sound of the sword, chi slapping his face, was crisp and clear. It resounded in the air and was exceptionally ear-piercing. Chapter 1958. You dare to hit me? Jiang Yulong felt a stinging pain on his face as he stared at Nie Tian in extreme shock. He had never imagined that Nie Tian would dare to slap him with sword chi. He had never imagined that Nie Tian's sword chi would be so fast and so frightening that he could not resist at all. What Jiang Yulong felt at this moment was not only humiliation, but also fear. He had originally thought that Nie Tian was still a piece of trash in front of him, but the truth was the exact opposite. The one who had no power to fight back was himself. The slap just now was just a small punishment. If you dare to be insolent again, the next sword will fall on your neck. Nie Tianling looked at Jiang Yulong coldly, his eyes filled with contempt and killing intent. Nie Tianyu, Jiang Yulong immediately flew into a rage and howled. But when he saw the killing intent in Nie Tian's eyes, he could not continue. Facing Nie Tian, Jiang Yulong was afraid. At this moment, he knew that he was no longer a match for Nie Tian. Impudent. At this moment, Jiang Su, who was at the side, bellowed angrily. The aura around his body surged as he stared coldly at Nie Tian and berated, "How dare you injure a member of my Jiang family in front of me?" As his berserk voice fell, Jiang Su released a frightening pressure that directly pressed towards Nie Tian. Bang! But before this frightening pressure could touch Nie Tian, it was blocked by another aura, and a loud explosion sounded in the air. Jiang Su and Guiwu Guangsha both took a step back and stood still at the same time. The person who blocked Jiang Su was Guiwu Guangsha. "Jiang Su, with your status, you're going too far by publicly attacking a junior." Guiwu Guangsha laughed cold and ridiculed Jiang Su. "Too far?" Jiang Su retorted angrily. "This brat dared to injure a member of my Jiang clan right in front of me. The one who has gone too far is him." After saying that, Jiang Su looked at Nie Tian coldly. His eyes were vicious to the extreme, as if he wanted to skin Nie Tian alive. If not for Ghost Marshal Wildsand's presence, Jiang Su would have killed Nie Tian without the slightest hesitation. "Really?" Nie Tianling smiled and asked back. "Jiang Yulong provoked me first. I was just passively fighting back. Don't tell me you're saying that I should just stand there and let him attack me just because he's a member of the Jiang clan? Brat, you were the one who attacked first." Jiang Su roared, his face flushed red. "He's the one who provoked me first." Nie Tian didn't back down and said coldly, "Do I have to bite back after being bitten by a dog? Of course, we have to fight back." "Brat, who are you calling a dog?" Jiang Yulong suddenly reacted. Half of his face was swollen even more. "Whoever bites me is a dog." Nie Tian disdainfully smiled, extremely arrogant. In fact, he had already shown mercy when he attacked just now. Otherwise, how could Jiang Yulong still be alive? If Jiang Yulong's strength far surpassed Nie Tian's, he would have killed Nie Tian without the slightest hesitation. "Bastard!" Jiang Yulong roared angrily, but he didn't dare to attack. He could only look at Jiang Yuji and shouted, "Ninth brother, quickly attack and kill this brat for me." Jiang Yuji's face was gloomy. He glanced at Guiwu Guangsha, obviously very afraid of the latter. "Yuji, are you going to stand by and do nothing when you see your elder brother being beaten?" Jiang Su looked at Jiang Yuji and said eccentrically. Obviously, he was reminding the latter that he would deal with Guiwu Guangsha. Hearing Jiang Su's words, Jiang Yuji no longer hesitated. He took a step forward and stared coldly at Nie Tian. He said coldly, "Nie Tian, do you dare to fight with me? One is an idiot, the other is also an idiot. You two brothers are really a pair of idiots." Nie Tian looked at Jiang Yuji with disdain and said coldly, "Since you want to humiliate yourself, I naturally don't mind fulfilling your wish." Arrogant. Jiang Yuji was scolded as an idiot by Nie Tian. He immediately flew into a rage. With a roar, the sword intent on his body crazily rose. He fiercely stomped on the ground and leaped into the sky. This guy was very scheming. He wanted to fight with Nie Tian in the sky. Obviously, he didn't want Guiwu Guangsha to interfere. Nie Tianling laughed. His figure leaped and stood in the sky, facing Jiang Yuji. Guiwu Guangsha knew Nie Tian's strength. Of course, he wasn't worried at all. Jiang Su was also very confident in Jiang Yuji's strength. Therefore, he also had a calm and composed attitude. There was even a smile hanging on the corner of his mouth. It was as if he could already see the tragic scene of Nie Tian being killed by Jiang Yuji. At this time, many people were alarmed. They surrounded the two people in the sky and began to discuss. "Isn't that silver-haired swordsman Nie Tian? Why is he fighting with you?" Right now, Nie Tian is in the limelight. Who doesn't want to defeat him and be in the limelight? That's true. As long as you defeat Nie Tian, you will definitely shock everyone. The crowd's discussion fell into Jiang Yuji's ears. The latter smiled sinisterly and said, "Nie Tian, it seems that I'm not the only one who wants to defeat you." Nie Tianling sneered and said, "Jiang Yuji, you are not the only one who has been defeated by me." Jiang Yuji's face darkened. He said in a cold voice, "Nie Tian, I really don't understand. You're just a high god. What gives you the right to be so arrogant?" "You will understand soon." Nie Tianling laughed. He activated the runes of the forbidden technique in his body. However, he condensed them outside his body and did not directly erupt. He wanted to give Jiang Yuji a big surprise. Jiang Yuji's face was gloomy to the extreme. A golden longsword appeared in his hand. Sword intent surged violently from all over his body. His eyes were cold and piercing. He said, "This sword will take your life." As soon as his voice faded, Jiang Yuji's figure moved. His long sword soared into the sky. Golden sword intent blossomed and transformed into a golden sword shadow. It was as dazzling as sunlight, but it contained a terrifying killing intent. Jiang Yuji used all of his strength in this sword attack. He wanted to kill Nie Tian with one sword attack. Almost at the same time, the runes of the forbidden technique condensed around Nie Tian's body suddenly erupted. His aura soared crazily. An incomparably mighty sword intent gushed out and turned into a sword shadow in the air. It slashed down like a collapsing mountain. Ow, how is this possible? Jiang Yuji felt Nie Tian's sword momentum. His eyes trembled violently, and his face became somewhat lifeless. He could not imagine that Nie Tian could actually burst out such a terrifying power. Nie Tian's sword momentum completely suppressed Jiang Yuji. If this sword fell, even if Jiang Yuji did not die, he would definitely be seriously injured. Yuji, Jiang Su saw this scene from afar. He immediately sensed that something was wrong. He could not help but scream, and his face turned pale. He wanted to save Yi Futian, but he was too far away and could not make it in time. Jiang Yuji was really an idiot. Originally, he did not want Ghost Marshal Wild Sand to intervene in the battle. However, he ended up harming himself. The terrifying sword shadow suddenly descended. Jiang Yuji immediately felt the aura of death. His face became incomparably shocked. Chapter 1959. High up in the air, Nie Tian suddenly sensed that someone was ambushing him. His countenance changed, and he instantly reacted. Astral soul wings appeared on his back, and his silhouette flickered, retreating several hundred meters to the side. Bang! At this moment, a muffled sound rang out in the air. Jiang Yuji's silhouette was forced back 1,000 meters, but he wasn't injured. Because Nie Tian had abruptly given up on attacking, it caused the sword shadow's attacks to weaken greatly, allowing Jiang Yuji to escape with his life. Bang! Almost at the same time, the sharp light in the air shot over. Although Nie Tian had already reacted in time, he was still struck by the aftershock, and his silhouette was flung backwards. In mid-air, the wings on Nie Tian's back trembled, and he forcefully stabilized his body. Drawing a deep breath, his tensed countenance calmed down. That moment just now was too dangerous. Fortunately, he reacted in time, or else he would have been heavily injured. The person who attacked was obviously someone who had been hiding for a long time, and the timing was perfect, choosing the moment when Nie Tian and Jiang Yuji were clashing. "What's going on?" Jiang Yuji stood in the air, looking at Nie Tian with astonishment on his face. He still hadn't reacted. Why did Nie Tian suddenly give up when he had the chance to injure or even kill him? Up until now, he still hadn't sensed that someone was ambushing Nie Tian. The expressions of the spectators also changed as they stared at the sky in shock, not knowing what had happened. Everything happened in the blink of an eye. Nobody knew that Nie Tian had just experienced a moment of life and death. Although Guiwu Guangsha and Jiang Su were far away, they both knew what had happened. "There's an assassin." Guiwu Guangsha frowned and took a step forward, wanting to act. However, he was blocked by Jiang Su. The latter laughed coldly. "Brother Guiwu, what are you trying to do?" Jiang Su, "Can't you see that there's someone hiding in the dark?" Guewu Kwangsha's expression sank as he roared in anger. There's someone hiding in the dark. That's Nie Tian's enemy. It has nothing to do with you. Jiang Su laughed sinisterly, and his aura grew even more domineering, blocking Guewu Kwangsha's path. Jiang Su, aren't you being too despicable by doing this? Guewu Kwangsha's gaze darkened as he immediately reacted. Jiang Su wanted to borrow the hands of someone hidden in the shadows to get rid of Nie Tian. Jiang Su had just witnessed Nie Tian's strength. It was too strange, and he already had the intention to kill him. However, with his identity, coupled with the presence of the ghost Marshal Wild Sand, wanting to kill Nie Tian was simply impossible. The person hiding in the dark had come at the right time. All Jiang Su had to do was block the ghost Marshal Wild Sand and prevent the latter from attacking, thus buying time for the assassin hiding in the dark. Brother Guewu, I advise you to watch the show from the sidelines. If we were to fight, you might not be able to gain the upper hand. Jiang Su sneered, his eyes filled with malice. Jiang Su, you're too shameless. Guewu Kwangsha roared in anger, and the aura around his body surged violently. He was actually planning to forcefully attack Jiang Su. Lord Guewu, don't interfere. However, right at this moment, Nie Tian gave a loud shout, signaling to Guewu Kwangsha not to act blindly without thinking. It was unknown how strong Jiang Su was, and for Guewu Kwangsha to act rashly was not a wise choice. Furthermore, Nie Tian had the confidence that the assassin hiding in the dark would not pose much of a threat to him. Just now, Nie Tian had been careless for a moment. However, he would be extremely cautious in the future. It had to be said that the assassin hiding in the dark was extremely cunning, and his concealment methods were exceptional. Nie Tian had only sensed his existence when he had attacked, and now he was unexpectedly unable to sense his existence. Fat Cat had not said a single word. It seemed that she had also not sensed the existence of the person hiding in the dark. Get out here! Nie Tian roared in anger and randomly stabbed out with his sword. Sword images filled the sky, forming a gigantic sword net that enveloped the void. Such an attack would not be able to cause any harm to the assassin hiding in the dark, but it would be able to find his position. The sword net surged forward like a tide, spreading out in the void. Nie Tian activated the holographic divine rune, and his divine sense enveloped the area. At the same time, a surge of star energy gushed out from his body, forming a spiritual vortex on his forehead. This was the move of the starry sky, ancient martial technique, Marks of Star Dream. Marks of Star Dream was a type of spiritual seal. As long as Nie Tian found the assassin's traces, he would be able to brand the assassin's body with Marks of Star Dream, and the assassin would have nowhere to hide. At this moment, Nie Tian saw a vague silhouette within the sword net. Let's see where you can run to now. The corner of Nie Tian's mouth curled into a cold smile, and the spiritual vortex on his forehead suddenly gushed out, directly descending upon the vague silhouette. The assassin felt a powerful spiritual pressure and couldn't help but exclaim in surprise, following which he frantically retreated. He clearly hadn't expected that Nie Tian would actually leave a spiritual seal on his body. Although this spiritual seal did not cause any harm to him, it made it impossible for him to hide. Try to escape? With a thought, Nie Tian locked on to the assassin's position and directly attacked with his sword. The vast and mighty sword's shadows were like mountains and seas, and like a falling galaxy, they crazily pressed towards the assassin. Not good. The assassin felt the pressure and couldn't help but cry out in fear. His figure frantically retreated even faster, and he narrowly avoided Nie Tian's attack. However, Nie Tian's figure rushed over, and the second sword slashed down. Nie Tian guessed that this assassin was most likely Ni Lin's assassin, so he mercilessly slashed down with his sword. What a powerful sword essence! At this moment, another voice resounded in the void, following which a huge palm shadow descended and unexpectedly blocked Nie Tian's fatal sword strike. Nie Tian's gaze slightly froze, and he steadied his body. He looked up into the sky, and saw that another black-clothed warrior had unexpectedly appeared. Moreover, his aura was extremely powerful, and it was vast and mighty. He stood there like a towering mountain. This brat's strength is indeed very strange. No wonder Lien Ru died in his hands. The next moment, another voice rang out, and then another black-clothed warrior appeared. He coldly stared at Nietian and said with a playful expression, "3 assassins." Nietian's eyes narrowed. He didn't expect that 3 assassins would appear at the same time, and they were all very strong. 2 of them were early-stage paramount gods, and the other was mid-stage paramount god. It seems that you're here to avenge the death of your companion. Nietian Tianling sneered, and his gaze swept across the 3 assassins. There was not the slightest bit of fear in his eyes, but rather a strong desire to fight. Each of these 3 assassins was stronger than the assassins Nietian had encountered in the Ashura sword field, but Nietian wasn't afraid at all. He believed in his own strength. "Brat, I admit that you're very strong, but today you will die without a doubt." One of the black-clothed men spoke coldly. He looked at Nietian with a cold gaze, as if he was looking at a dead man. He said, "To be able to make the 3 of us move out at the same time, your death is not unjust at all." "Really?" Nietian faintly smiled and said, "Do you think you can definitely kill me? Kid, you have the capital to be arrogant." The man in black said in a gloomy voice. His killing intent became even more intense as he said, "However, to be so insolent in front of me is your biggest mistake." Chapter 1960. As soon as Nietian saw the vortex in a man's hand, he sensed an intense threat that caused his expression to flicker. He could sense that the vortex in the man's hand had immense devouring power, and its aura was boundlessly vast, like a bottomless abyss. "Remember this, you stinky brat. I, and Wu Jiang, will be the one to kill you today." The black-robed man announced his name, looking extremely insolent. At the same time, his palm moved, slapping out directly. A black vortex rumbled and whistled through the air, transforming into a gigantic black beast. The colossal beast was pitch black and thousands of meters long. Like a dark mountain, it opened its ghastly mouth and swooped down towards Nietian. Boom! The surrounding space rumbled and suddenly darkened. It was as if the day had suddenly turned into night. And Wu Jiang's mouth twisted into a sinister smile, and he was completely confident that the palm would devour Nietian until not even his bones remained. When the crowd saw the dark beast, their eyes trembled. Obviously, they were shocked. Roar! Suddenly, the gigantic beast of darkness let out a deafening roar that reverberated through the entire world. It was as though the entire world itself was trembling along with it. "Be a good boy and prepare to die, you stinky brat." And Wu Jiang chuckled coldly. His palm strike was powerful enough to kill an ordinary mid-paramount god, and therefore, there was no way Nietian would be able to defend against it. Everyone present could sense how terrifying the black beast was, and were completely convinced that Nietian was going to die beyond the shadow of a doubt. Although Nietian was currently in the limelight, he was still too weak to face and Wu Jiang head-on. Ancient martial incantation of the starry sky. Starfire incinerates the sea. However, Nietian wasn't afraid of Wu Jiang's strange attack in the slightest. Immense star power surged out of his body as he swung his sword. Like a pillar of light, the flaming sword shot towards the black behemoth, illuminating the night sky. Rumble. The next moment, a shocking scene occurred. The flaming sword shadow was like a blade of light. After blocking the black giant beast, it burst out a powerful force and tore the black giant beast's body apart. What? The crowd was struck dumb for a second. They couldn't believe their eyes. Not only had Nietian blocked in Wu Jiang's attack with a single sword strike, but he had also shattered in Wu Jiang's attack. This was simply too terrifying. How was this possible? What kind of sword intent is this? How can it break through my attack? And Wu Jiang was knocked back several hundred meters by the sword images. His eyes were wide open as he shouted in shock. He had originally thought that his attack would definitely be able to kill Nietian. Who would have thought that he would be injured by Nietian instead? It seemed that Nie Tian's sword intent had an absolute suppressive effect on his strength. Is this all you've got? If that's all you've got, then it's very disappointing. Nie Tianling chuckled, and his sword intent surged even more madly than before. Bathed in boundless starlight, he looked holy and solemn. He had long since realized that Wujiang was a rare darkness-type warrior, and that was why the power he was unleashing was darkness-type power. Darkness attribute energy had a strong suppressive effect on almost all the other attributes within the 9 primordial powers, with the exception of light attribute energy that could contend against it. Therefore, although Wujiang was only a mid-paramount god, his battle prowess was enough to defeat a late paramount god. Unfortunately for him, his opponent was Nie Tian, who didn't have any of the 9 elements. Instead, he had the bizarre power of the stars. Star power was the essence of power and had a suppressive effect on all other types of power. That was especially true of darkness-type power. When Wujiang fought Nie Tian, not only was he unable to unleash the full power of his darkness-type power, but he was also being suppressed by Nie Tian. As a result, he was in a very disadvantageous position. That was the reason why Nie Tian was able to destroy his attack with a single strike and force him to retreat. Damn it! And Wujiang cursed when he realized that his power was being suppressed by Nie Tian. Then he laughed maniacally. Do you really think that just because your sword intent can suppress me, you brat? How laughable! With that, Wujiang attacked again. He clasped his hands together and slashed them down viciously. Terrifying darkness-type power transformed into a huge black sword that bore down on Nie Tian with the force of a mountain. The huge black sword fell from the sky, splitting the air on both sides, as if it were going to split heaven and earth in two. In the next moment, torrential black waves surged towards Nie Tian like raging tsunamis. And Wujiang was clearly determined to kill Nie Tian with this attack, and he was going all out to kill him. The world was dark, and the black light shrouded the boundless space, as if a huge black cloud had covered everything. What power! Everyone cried out when they sensed the terrifying aura. They could no longer see the light, only darkness. They had no idea what was going on. Such terrifying power was enough to heavily injure a late-stage paramount god. Even though Nie Tian had activated his 3 forbidden arts, he was only a peak over god. Could he withstand such power? No one could see anything. They all thought that Nie Tian must have been devoured by the darkness-type power and that not even a speck of him would be left. Ha ha! The person who forced the divine martial sword pagoda to concede is nothing more than this. At that moment, Wujiang's maniacal laughter rang out from the darkness. He was already celebrating his victory in advance. Wujiang, are you sure I'm dead? However, before Wujiang could finish speaking, a mocking voice rang out from the endless darkness. It's Nie Tian. Everyone's expressions changed when they heard the voice. The mocking voice that resounded in the darkness was clearly Nie Tian's voice. Nie Tian isn't dead. Everyone reacted and cried out in unison. They seemed overjoyed, as if they didn't want Nie Tian to die just like that. Rumble! The next moment, there was a huge rumble in the dark. A pillar of light appeared in the endless darkness, like sunlight piercing through the night sky. It tore a huge hole in the endless darkness. The hole instantly expanded, and endless starlight spread out, dispelling the darkness. The sudden scene made everyone's eyes tremble. They looked at the center of the starlight and saw a figure appear. It was Nie Tian. Right now, Nie Tian's body was glowing with starlight, and he was covered in star soul armor. He looked like a giant made of starlight. On his back was a pair of starlight wings that were hundreds of meters long. They were like 2 blades of starlight, and after dispelling the darkness, they seemed even sharper. You're the real joke if you think you can kill me with such strength. Nie Tianling laughed and took a step forward. The starlight around him became even more dazzling, completely dispelling the dark energy in the space. Chapter 1961. This is impossible, and Wujiang almost went crazy when he saw Nie Tian walk out of the darkness. He stared at Niet Tian in disbelief, his eyes filled with despair. How could he accept that his most powerful strike had been countered so effortlessly by Niet Tian? Furthermore, Niet Tian's taunts had driven him crazy, and Wu Jiang's attack had been truly terrifying. It had engulfed heaven and earth, and it was enough to make anyone's heart palpitate. If Wu Jiang's opponent had been an ordinary late-stage paramount god, he would have been seriously injured, if not killed. But Niet Tian was different. His astral power was the bane of darkness-type energy. Even the all-devouring darkness seemed powerless in the face of his astral power. Niet Tian activated his astral soul armor, and with the sharpness of his astral soul power, he easily tore through the darkness. After activating the 3 forbidden arts, Niet Tian's astral power had awakened to 800 billion, which allowed him to unleash a steady stream of astral power. However, Niet Tian wouldn't be able to display the full power of his star power before he fully awakened his 900 billion star power. Even so, the astral power was more than enough for him to deal with an opponent like Wu Jiang. It's time for me to make my move, Wu Jiang. Niet Tianling chuckled, and starlight erupted from his body, illuminating the boundless space like a river of stars. And Wu Jiang looked at Niet Tian with a blank expression. He didn't dare imagine that Niet Tian would be able to unleash such terrifying power. Starry sky, ancient martial incantation. Star flow devours the heavens. Niet Tian roared, and the starry sky, heaven slashed through the air. Astral soul sword will bloomed in the sky, and a 1,000-meter-long astral sword image appeared, surrounded by raging astral soul flames. The starry sky, heaven combined with the astral soul sword will, the starry sky, ancient martial incantation, and the astral soul flames. Niet Tian was going to unleash the full power of his astral power in this attack. Frightening sword shadows poured down from the sky, and a frightening aura of sword intent filled the surrounding space. It was as if even the heavens and earth were burning. The sword will contain pure power of the stars, which was the nemesis of darkness-type powers. It was extremely lethal to Wu Jiang. Niet Tian is so scary. The crowd was shocked by the scene in front of them, and they all exclaimed. Just now, Niet Tian had been completely suppressed by Wu Jiang, but now he was going to counterattack. Such power was truly terrifying. What are you two waiting for? Hurry up and attack. And Wu Jiang's eyes trembled uncontrollably, but he managed to keep his cool. He shouted at the top of his lungs, ordering the 2 black-robed men behind him to attack. Only then did the 2 of them react. They attacked at the same time, one with a palm and the other with a fist. Palm shadows and fist shadows appeared at the same time and rushed over from both sides. Boom! Boom! A frightening explosion was heard. The palm shadows and fist shadows landed at the same time, hitting the sword shadows in midair. Although they didn't shatter the sword shadows, they greatly weakened the sword shadows' attack. Seeing this, Wu Jiang took advantage of the opportunity. A pair of black wings appeared on his back, and with a sudden flap, he dodged the direct attack of the sword shadows. However, he had to bear the residual power of the sword intent. Within Wu Jiang's strength, he was naturally able to withstand some of the residual power of the Star Soul sword intent. Fortunately, his 2 companions acted in time. Otherwise, Wu Jiang would have died if the sword had landed. Get out of here, growled Wu Jiang as he struggled to free himself. Then, his body flickered as he prepared to flee. Before he started fighting with Niet Tian, Wu Jiang had been confident that he could kill Niet Tian. Now, however, he could only flee. It was truly ironic. The 3 of you came to Shenwu City to cause trouble, and you want to leave just like that? You underestimate the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. However, at that moment, a clear voice sounded in the air. A petite figure appeared in the sky. Everyone looked in the direction of the voice and saw that it was none other than Lien Wui. Lien Wui. When Niet Tian saw Lien Wui's figure, his expression changed, and he cried out in alarm. Little girl, do you think you can stop us? You're courting death. And Wu Jiang suddenly looked up and smirked coldly. He slammed his palm forward, and suddenly, a terrifying dark force appeared and condensed into a giant black beast that pressed toward Lien Wui. Lien Wui's beautiful eyes flashed, and her small face was instantly filled with fear. She had not expected Wu Jiang's casual slap to be so terrifying. However, she was still calm. At the moment of crisis, she thrust her sword forward. The sword's shadows whistled through the air and were extremely sharp. However, the moment they touched the giant black beast, they were immediately swallowed. Lien Wui's strength was already below Wu Jiang's, and her sword intent was also suppressed by the dark force. Under such circumstances, how could she be a match for Wu Jiang? Watch out! The sudden scene made Tian's eyes tremble, and he shouted. The wings on his back flapped, and he flew toward Lien Wui. Tian wanted to help, but it was too late. Lien Wui was swallowed by the giant black beast. Damn it! While he was still in the air, Tian's body surged with the power of stars, and it turned into a huge pillar of light that directly tore the giant black beast into pieces. Lien Wui's figure appeared in the air, but she was floating in the air. Her body was surrounded by dark force, and her aura was constantly weakening. Tian came to Lien Wui's side, and his expression changed when he saw that the latter was severely injured. He quickly released the enormous power of the Earth Source, which turned into endless life force and flowed into Lien Wui's body. With the nourishment of the power of the Earth Source, Lien Wui's life force finally stabilized, but her face was still as pale as a sheet of paper, and she was also unconscious. And Wu Jiang saw that Tian was very nervous about Lien Wui, and he couldn't help but laugh strangely. Brat, don't waste your energy. That little girl took a direct hit from me, and she's dead for sure. He hadn't been able to kill Tian, but he had killed one of the people around him, so this trip was not in vain. That's Miss Lien Wui. Everything happened in the blink of an eye, and the crowd finally reacted, and they immediately cried out. Tian didn't pay any attention to Wu Jiang as he continued to infuse Lien Wui with Earth Vein Source power. He discovered that as soon as he stopped infusing her with Earth Vein Source power, Lien Wui's aura began to weaken. Tian could only use the Earth Source to forcibly maintain Lien Wui's life force. This is a good chance, and Wu Jiang also realized this, and his eyes lit up. He looked at the two people beside him and growled, "Attack!" Tian wanted to save Lien Wui, so he couldn't attack. This was the best opportunity for Wu Jiang and the others to kill him. And Wu Jiang and the other two people moved at the same time, and they madly rushed toward Tian. Boom! However, at this moment, an extremely terrifying sword force appeared in the void, and a sharp aura filled the entire world. And Wu Jiang and the other two people sensed that something was wrong at the same time, and they abruptly raised their heads to see a child who was only 6 or 7 years old standing in the sky, staring at them coldly. This child was none other than Sakura. Chapter 1962. Lien Wui was injured by Wu Jiang, and her life was in danger. This greatly angered Sakura, causing the latter to reveal his wild, murderous nature. Lien Wui was originally standing with Sakura, and the latter didn't notice when she ran over. If he knew that Lien Wui was going to make a move, Sakura would definitely stop her. But now, it was too late to say anything. The only thing that Sakura could do was to avenge Lien Wui. Sakura looked at Wu Jiang and the other two with a gloomy gaze. His eyes were desolate and murderous, and his entire body was filled with strong murderous intent. He looked like an enraged god of death. His murderous intent is so terrifying. The crowd felt the murderous intent around Sakura from tens of thousands of meters away, and their expressions immediately became horrified and extremely shocked. What a strange little baby. And Wu Jiang looked at Sakura and felt the threat of death approaching. He couldn't help but secretly exclaim in his heart. How could he possibly think that he would actually feel afraid when he was targeted by a child? And Wu Jiang had once fought with opponents stronger than him, and even then, he wasn't afraid. But now, facing Sakura, he was actually afraid. This feeling of fear was very real, and it was definitely not an illusion. This little baby's murderous intent is so terrifying. The other two black-clothed men were also horrified. They swallowed their saliva and said with sluggish expressions. They were all killers who had killed countless people, and they had seen many strange enemies in their lives. But it was their first time seeing such a strange opponent like Sakura. Facing the enraged Sakura, and Wu Jiang and the other two black-clothed men actually panicked a little. Sword technique, God slaying. And at this moment, Sakura's figure suddenly moved. The heaven-slaughtering sword appeared in his hand, and he struck straight out. The simple and unadorned movement seemed ordinary at first glance, but it released a heart-palpitating aura, and at the same time, an extremely terrifying power erupted. Swoosh! The sword intent containing murderous intent condensed into a murderous sword shadow in the air, and like a meteor, it suddenly shot out. Unimaginable speed, unimaginable angle, and unimaginable trajectory. Like a bolt from the blue, it directly descended on a black-clothed man. That black-clothed man didn't have time to react at all, and he was directly decapitated. The dripping blood splattered in the void, making the atmosphere of the scene even more bloody and strange. What's going on? Most of the people didn't see clearly how Sakura killed them. They looked horrified and didn't dare to believe the scene in front of them. Sakura's sword was too fast and too strong, simply not giving people time to react. Retreat. And Wu Jiang stared blankly for a moment. He seemed to have smelled the scent of blood in the air. Only then did he come to his senses. With a low growl, he retreated. I've said it before, all of you must die. But at this time, Dishur Tian's voice rang out again. Although his voice was immature, it contained a kind of domineering and evil aura that could annihilate everything. It was like a death horn that made people panic. At this moment, Wu Jiang didn't even have the courage to make a move. The wings on his back flapped crazily, wanting to escape from Sakura's line of sight. Sakura's title in his previous life was Heaven-Slaughtering Demon Sword. He was originally a cruel and bloodthirsty person, and Wu Jiang heavily injured Lien Wui, which directly aroused Sakura's murderous nature, turning him into a murderous demon. Swoosh! Sakura was high up in the sky, and his sword fell directly. Another black-clothed man died, tragically on the spot. This was no longer a battle, but a massacre. In front of Sakura, and Wu Jiang and the others didn't even have the strength to fight back. There's still one more. After killing two black-clothed men in a row, Sakura's chilling gaze locked onto Wu Jiang. The corners of his mouth twitched slightly, and his eyes were full of murderous intent. You're going too far. And Wu Jiang suddenly felt the murderous intent behind him. It was vast and boundless, and actually shrouded his entire body. He immediately turned around and roared. His entire body's aura surged violently, and he struck out with both palms at the same time. Two black vortexes appeared in the air, and they transformed into giant black swords in the air. One on the left, and the other on the right, they blasted towards Sakura. At the same time, Wu Jiang used the power of his palms to retreat even faster. His two palms seemed extremely ferocious, but in reality, they were used to save his life. He didn't intend to kill Sakura at all. Instead, he only wanted to block the ladder for a while and buy himself more time to escape. If others saw the power of Wu Jiang's palms, they would certainly have some scruples and wouldn't dare to rashly advance. But Sakura wouldn't. Sakura had lived for hundreds of thousands of years, and he had encountered all kinds of opponents. He could see in Wu Jiang's intentions very clearly. Sword technique, devil's hand, Dishur Tian said in a low voice. Immediately, waves of wild sword intent gushed out from the tip of his sword. It actually condensed into a giant hand in the air that covered the sky. Like a mountain, it came crashing down. This was a new sword technique that Sakura had never revealed before. It looked very strange, and it vividly displayed the power of the sword intent. If Sakura had used swift and fierce sword intent to kill the two black-clothed men earlier, then at this moment, he was using the ferocious sword intent. Boom, boom, boom. The giant palm fell, and the two giant black swords in the air were directly destroyed. Endless dark energy dissipated in the void. What a terrifying aura! When everyone saw this scene, their expressions couldn't help but stiffen, and they were extremely shocked. The power that Sakura had displayed was too shocking, and it directly crushed An Wujiang. Sakura is indeed the heaven-murdering sword demon, a legendary swordsman. Nyetian looked at Sakura's figure, and his gaze was also trembling. He had just exchanged blows with An Wujiang, so he naturally knew how terrifying the latter was. If not for the raw star stone, Nyetian couldn't possibly be An Wujiang's opponent. Nyetian had relied on the absolute restraint of the power of the stars to suppress An Wujiang. However, Sakura had completely relied on the strength of his own sword intent to crush An Wujiang. Damn it! As An Wujiang retreated madly, he suddenly felt a terrifying power pressing down on him from the sky, and his expression couldn't help but change. At this moment, the giant hand in the void suddenly exploded, and it turned into a sky full of sharp blades that fell toward An Wujiang like a violent storm. An Wujiang's eyes suddenly narrowed, and he caught a glimpse of Sakura's face. The latter's mouth was cold and sinister, and it was a very bloody and cruel smile. At this moment, An Wujiang felt the true aura of death. His face was ashen, and he subconsciously spat out two words, "It's over." At this moment, he was indeed over. In the face of Sakura's killing sword, An Wujiang no longer had any strength to fight back, and he could only obediently accept his death. When An Wujiang saw the overwhelming sword shadows and sharp blades falling toward him, he was like a broken leaf in a violent storm, and he was completely powerless to resist. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Countless sword shadows and sharp blades fell from the sky, and An Wujiang's figure was instantly submerged, and his aura completely disappeared. And Wujiang and the other two were all assassins of the Ni Lin, and like Lian Ru, they were all ranked in the 13 Ni Lin Thorns. Chapter 1963. In the blink of an eye, Sakura had killed 3 people. His figure stood in the sky like a god of death. Everyone looked at that young face, and their eyes revealed unconcealable fear and dread. Sakura was too strong, unbelievably strong. At this time, Sakura's ferocious face gradually recovered, and the violence in his eyes slowly dissipated. After he calmed down, he moved to Nyetian's side and asked anxiously, "Nyetian, how is she?" "It's not looking good," Nyetian said in a deep voice. He had been transferring the life force of the source of the earth to Lian Wui, but even so, he could only stabilize the latter's breath. After being seriously injured, Lian Wui was like a bottomless abyss that sucked away life force. No matter how hard Nyetian tried, he couldn't fill the abyss. Sakura's little face darkened, and his eyes were extremely nervous. Nyetian noticed this and couldn't help but sigh in his heart. During this period of time, Sakura had been staying with Lian Wui. After being together for a long time, even a stone would develop feelings. In his previous life, Sakura pursued martial arts wholeheartedly. He didn't have anyone close to him, and he was always alone along the way. Although he was annoyed when Lian Wui accompanied him during this period of time, he would be inexplicably angry when he saw her injured. At this time, looking at Lian Wui's dying appearance, Sakura felt a real pain in his heart. "Sakura, don't worry. I won't let her die," Nyetian said calmly when he saw Sakura's silence. "Nyetian, you must save her," Sakura said in a deep voice, his eyes sad but firm. Nyetian nodded and then prepared to leave with Lian Wui. At this time, a group of swordsmen appeared. They were the people of the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. They came only after the battle was over. Nyetian turned around and looked at the group of swordsmen. The leader was Xian Zongfeng. "What happened here?" Xian Zongfeng took a step forward and came to Nyetian's side. Seeing Lian Wui unconscious, he roared in grief. "Wui, who did this to you?" Nyetianling looked at Xian Zongfeng coldly and said, "Sword Master Wu, if you don't want Lian Wui to die, then step aside." Nyetian was not a fool. How could he not see that Xian Zongfeng was acting? He had fought with Ni Lin's men for such a long time, but Xian Zongfeng had appeared after the battle had ended. This was obviously suspicious. Perhaps Xian Zongfeng was really heartbroken at the moment, but it was not because Lien Wui was injured. It was because Ni Lin's people were dead, but Nie Tian was still alive. Get out of the way. Sakura looked at Xian Zongfeng and said coldly. Xian Zongfeng was stunned for a moment. He looked very embarrassed, but he restrained himself and said, saving people is more important. Saving people is more important. Nie Tian and Sakura immediately left and headed towards the divine martial city's city lord residence. Gui Wu Kuangsha glared at Jiangsu and followed them. Jiangsu was still in a daze. Everything had happened so fast that he still could not react. What kind of person was Di Shitian? Why was he so abnormal? He was an existence that had reached the peak of martial Dao. It took Jiangsu a long time to react. He came to Xian Zongfeng and asked with a horrified expression, Swordmaster Wu, who is that kid? Xian Zongfeng glanced at Jiangsu and said with a bitter smile, he is a legendary swordsman who has fused sword and martial arts into one. I don't know anything else. A legendary swordsman. Jiangsu's eyes suddenly trembled. His expression changed again, and he was extremely shocked. A legendary swordsman was a legendary existence. No one knew how long it had been since a legendary swordsman appeared in the 9 domains. How could Jiangsu have imagined that a 6 or 7-year-old child could be a legendary swordsman? What kind of existence was Sakura? It was completely against common sense. Originally, Jiangsu was very shocked by Nie Tian's strength. But after Sakura appeared, he was even more shocked. Because of Sakura's existence, Jiangsu was even more afraid of Nie Tian. Nie Tian brought Lien Wui back to the city lord residence very quickly. In the room, Nie Tian kept transferring the power of the Terra's source into Lien Wui, but his expression became more and more strange. Lien Wui was like an abyss, constantly absorbing the power of the Terra's source, but there was no sign of her waking up. What's going on? Nie Tian frowned, and beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. There was a limit to the power of the Terra's source in his body. If he continued to transfer it like this, he would not be able to hold on for long. Nie Tian, how is Lien Wui? Sakura looked on nervously from his side. He could feel that Lien Wui's breathing did not improve, and he could not help but become anxious. Nie Tian shook his head and did not speak. He could feel that there was an extremely violent power surging in Lien Wui's body. It was like a wild beast, constantly devouring her life force. That terrifying power seemed to be some kind of sword intent. It was very strange. The power that Nie Tian had transferred into the Terra's source was being devoured by this power. Could it be the blood-weeping sword infant? Nie Tian suddenly thought of something, and his expression changed. He shouted, Fat, what's going on? In the past, Fat Cat would have appeared in such a situation, but this time, Fat Cat did not appear. It was very strange. Nie Tian, don't waste your energy. This little girl is beyond saving. Fat Cat's figure appeared, but he nodded with a solemn expression. Beyond saving? Nie Tian was stunned, but his hands did not stop moving. He continued to transfer power into Lien Wui's body. He did not believe that Lien Wui could not be saved. Boss Chinchilla, what's going on? Why do you say that Lien Wui is beyond saving? Sakura was frightened by little Fat Cat's words. Only now did he react and asked with a horrified expression. Sigh. Fat Cat sighed and said, This little girl was attacked by the dark attribute power. Although it did not kill her on the spot, it greatly stimulated the blood-weeping sword infant in her body, causing it to go out of control. The blood-weeping sword infant is constantly devouring her life force. She's beyond saving. Hearing Fat Cat's words, Nie Tian could not help but gasp. He did not expect the situation to be so serious. The blood-weeping sword infant suddenly went out of control. No wonder it was useless even after he transferred so much power from the Terra source into Lien Wui. Impossible. Impossible. I don't believe it. Indra was stunned for a few seconds and suddenly reacted. He suddenly went crazy and roared. At this moment, Indra realized that Lien Wui occupied such an important position in his heart.